This episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. These days, keeping track of your subscriptions can be near impossible, and nobody wants to pay for things they're not using. Thankfully, there's Rocket Money, the personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. With Rocket Money, you can monitor your spending, build a personal budget, and get help lowering your bills. They even handle the customer service part for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in unwanted subscriptions. So stop wasting money on things you aren't using and start growing your savings today when you go to rocketmoney.com/command zone.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the command zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Welcome back. Whoa!
You go.
What?
You do it.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
I'm Jimmy Wong. It's me. It's us.
And today we are rounding out the year with the brand new set, Foundations.
Yeah.
This one is directed toward getting more players into the game.
Yeah.
Releasing a whole set of accessible, simple cards.
Nice and simple.
To get you playing Magic and having fun right away. But there are still some very powerful, very interesting commanders in this set, and we want to walk you through how you can build them to be successful at your next game night.
But of course, if you're a new player, especially coming into the game because of Foundations, you're going to need to start building that collection and building those decks. So in order to do so, why don't you check out our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/command. If you head over to Card Kingdom, it is an online retailer that you will be able to get all of the Magic cards and products that you need to either set up your next game night, whether or not you're buying new Foundations product. They have a bunch of really great stuff for brand new players, starter packs and all that stuff. They also just have your regular play boosters if you want to draft the set or just crack packs or get some singles from the Foundation set to build into your new deck. So just go to cardkingdom.com/command, order all of your cards and get them in one convenient single package, arriving at your doorstep so you can sleeve those cards up and get ready to play or teach new players. They've got a lot of products on Card Kingdom's website that also help with new players as well. So check it out, cardkingdom.com/command.
All right, and bookmark that affiliate link, and while you're doing it, use this one at ultrapro.com/command. UltraPro has all of the gaming accessories that you need to store all of your new cards, your new decks, keep them safe, keep them organized. Plus, they have access to Magic official art. So if you see a card, a theme that you love, go on their website, check it out, see what kind of products that they have that support that theme. They put out product for every single set. Plus, they put out some product for some extra special secret lairs as well. So if there's a secret lair that strikes your fancy, go on their site right away. They sell out fast. You can sign up for their newsletter to make sure that you're on the up and up for all their new product and flash sales. Again, ultrapro.com/command helps out the show and gets you some cool product to keep your cards safe.
And we're very excited to announce that we have a brand new Kickstarter going for the Game Nights deck box. Rachel, this was our most popular Kickstarter of all time, and we brought back the deck box. This time it has orange stitching on it, and it looks absolutely gorgeous, and we are so excited to get this back into the hands of our backers.
Yeah, these are sweet. You can fit 3 decks in one, 2 double-sleeved commander decks, and you can use the middle compartment for a 60-card double-sleeved deck, or is it an unsleeved commander deck and go in there as well?
Yeah, and, well, actually a 100-card Canlander deck, which I just put in there the other day, single sleeved. It fit. You can also use it for tokens and dice.
Yeah.
Everything you want, basically. This thing is incredible. It's the Mythic Alcove Vault design from UltraPro. I use these deck boxes for every single convention. I fit 3 of them into my backpack. That's 6 decks. That's exactly how many I like to bring to Magic Cons. Not to mention, they're super sturdy, really high quality. They have the incredible Game Nights insignia as well, adorned on the inside. The beautiful orange stitching all around. And this Kickstarter is available right now until the beginning of December.
Yeah, and don't forget, there is a signed version that we are offering on the Kickstarter as well. So it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. The signatures are the first time we've ever offered it. The link will be in the description below, and we're also going to be tweeting it out and all that good stuff. So go check out the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I love these boxes.
The final destination is our Patreon, patreon.com/command zone. This week's episode is dedicated to Damian Pacheco. Pacheco.
You rock, Damian.
You rock. All right, Foundations. We used to have core sets, those went away. Then we had Origins, then that went away. And now we have Foundations. a brand new way for players to get into the game, but also just a way to sort of harken back to sort of the core things that make Magic awesome. So while the commanders we talk about today might be a little bit more on the simple side, not as flashy, that doesn't mean they are not powerful. And so we're going to go over those cards today, the most powerful commanders in Foundations, and we're going to go through a little bit more simplified and a little slower. We're not going to rush through explanations of things or go yada, 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 as I like to do. Because there may be new players watching this episode, or even if you're in the franchise and a veteran player, you might want to brush up a little bit on how exactly everything works, and there's new terminology and all sorts of other things, so we'll make sure to cover as much of that as possible. So let's dive into it, Rachel.
Starting with a beloved character in the Magic community, it's Alesha, who laughs at fate. For 1, a black and a red, this is a legendary creature, human warrior. She's a 2/2 with first strike. Whenever Alesha attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then it has Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, return target creature card with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from your graveyard to the battlefield.
All right.
So this is a red and black commander deck that is going to recur creatures from your graveyard after making Alesha's power even bigger, so it can reanimate even bigger creatures.
Yep. So mana value means the top right of every single card will have a mana value. In this case, Alesha's mana value is 1 black and a red, and the total mana value is 3. You just add up the total cost there. And then the word raid, a lot of cards have these. They are called keywords or abilities. Usually the name of the ability doesn't matter so much. It just signifies, in this case, raid means if you attack with a creature this turn. So you just really want to pay attention to the non-italics text to understand what the card does. And as always, if you're confused, just read it again, because reading the card almost always explains the card.
Yeah, they were pretty good about it for this set. Not as many shortcuts as they're used to. So the first step to building an Alesha commander deck is, of course, to buff up her power. That way you can reanimate things with bigger and bigger mana values, which means they're more and more powerful. The first one I wanted to include is Lovisa, Cold Eyes.
Ooh.
This is 3 red for a human. It's each creature that's a barbarian, a warrior, or a berserker gets +2/+2 and has haste. So Lovisa is a 5-drop, so it'll take you a second to reanimate her with Alesha, but she buffs Alesha because she's a warrior, and all of the other creatures that are warriors or barbarians or even berserkers in this deck. You're in Rakdos. This is an aggressive deck, so you're trying to make everybody as powerful as possible and attack.
Yeah. So Alesha's automatically going to be buffing her power when she attacks. She'll become a 3/3 the turn that you're able to attack with her. And Lovisa adds a +2/+2 on top of it. That is not a +1/+1 counter. So this is changing her 2/2 to a 4/4, and then any counters on top of that are going to make it even bigger. Now, normally, it's hard to get cards with mana value 5, like Lovisa, from the graveyard on the battlefield. But with cards like this, you can really start going for those huge epic plays. But if you don't have the ability to do so quickly, then you also have cards like Falthis, Shadowcat Familiar, which is a 3 mana value card. So that means by the first time Alesha attacks, she'll be a 3/3, and then she'll be able to reanimate a card like this. And it says commanders you control have Menace and Death Touch.
This is so powerful with your commander because she already has first strike.
Yeah.
So combining first strike and Death Touch means that she can kill any creature that blocks her as long as that creature doesn't have indestructible.
And Menace means that she must be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Now, when you have first strike, Death Touch, and Menace, no one is ever going to block your commander.
Can't imagine.
Ever. Yeah. It's going to be very, very hard for them to, because it means that their creatures are going to die and all that. And the nice thing about Alesha is that she just cares about attacking and getting her power bigger. And when that happens, it doesn't need to do combat damage or anything else. It just needs to have a high power and go to your end step, and she has attacked that turn. So Falthis is a great include in a deck like this, and any commander deck that wants to be attacking.
Haste is very important when you're in an aggressive strategy. So anything that you can do that lets Alesha attack the turn she comes down is going to be very good in this kind of deck. I like something like Bloodsworn Steward, which is 2 red for a vampire knight with flying. It says commander creatures you control get +2/+2 and have haste.
Nice.
It's a 4 mana value creature, so it's pretty easy to recur with Alesha if it does go to the graveyard, but it's also a great thing to play if Alesha dies and you need to cast it again, and then she'll be able to attack right away. All of these effects that we're talking about right now are creatures, which makes them really good with Alesha's ability in the long run.
Yeah, there's a good chance Alesha dies in games because players will point removal spells at her. And so in this case, having the ability to give haste when you recast Alesha from the command zone is very powerful. That's why I also like Enduring Courage. It's a more recent card. It says whenever another creature you control enters, it gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. And then the nice thing about Enduring Courage is that if it does die, it comes back to the battlefield as an enchantment and just sticks around pretty much forever in most games.
Other ways that you can buff your commander's power, you can give her a sword. What is a warrior without her weapon? A quick way to buff her up is a Black Blade Reforged. This is a 2-mana legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control, and it only costs 3 to equip a legendary creature. This is a huge buff all at once.
Yeah, this might make Alesha +5/+5 when it comes down.
And that means you're reanimating an 8-drop at the end of your turn as long as she survives. It's really great with First Strike, and it's a huge buff to reanimate big, powerful creatures.
Yeah, so a lot of equipment usually adds power and toughness to your commander, and in that case, once it's on, you don't have to worry about the +1/+1 counters because those are a bit slower than usually equipment. So Champion's Helm is a 3-mana artifact equipment that gives a creature +2/+2. And as long as the creature is legendary, it has hexproof, which is very powerful. It means that your commander can no longer be the target of anything that says target creature on it. So it's very hard for players to remove your commander at that point with a removal spell. And the equip cost is only 1.
I love Champion's Helm in this deck. I think it's a really powerful, it's a big buff. It's a cheap equip cost and giving it that protection when so much of your plan is revolving around keeping Alesha on the battlefield.
Pretty good.
I also like Hero's Blade in decks like this. It's a 2-mana equipment that says equipped creature gets +3/+2, and it says whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Hero's Blade to it. You cast it on turn 2, perfect, easy, and then on turn 3, you cast Alesha. It automatically equips to her, so she's a 5/4 right away, and then when she attacks, she's a 6/5. Pretty powerful.
Yeah, pretty good. Another way to just make sure that your commander doesn't get removed, similar to Champion's Helm, is a new card from a recent set called Lava Spur Boots. Very cheap to play for 1 mana, and the equip cost is just 1. Gives a creature +1/+0, haste, and ward 1. Ward is a little similar to hexproof. It just means that whenever someone tries to target your commander, they have to pay an additional mana, in this case 1 mana because it's ward 1. So a lot of times it also just makes people think twice about removing your commander.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be fully hexproof for people to find it inconvenient to target Alesha and send that removal elsewhere.
But it's got a power buff. It also has haste. It has everything you want.
Next, you can lean into the +1/+1 counter thing. You can go with Agitator Ant, which I like in decks like this. This is 2 in a red for a 2/2 insect. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control. Goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. Each player includes you, so you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on your commander, and it gives you a little bit of defense, because it goads important creatures around the board. They're forced to attack, and they can't attack you. This is an aggressive deck. You're trying to turn your creatures sideways, deal damage in combat, and Agitator Ant says, you should do that too, but don't point it at me. I'm helping you out.
Yeah, and even though you goad your own creature, it's okay, because you're trying to attack with Alesha every turn anyway.
The goad, when you goad your own creature, it wears off on your upkeep.
Oh, so nice.
It's actually not even goad
until your next turn. See, I need a Foundations episode to help me out.
I don't know. They didn't put goad in this set for a reason.
Yeah, no. Another card that does +1/+1 counters is Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, or Seneschal. It's 1 in a red for a 2/2. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card, which is great. And any creature attacking allows you to discard a card. And then when you do, you put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. So this means that Alesha, when she attacks, will get 2 counters, 1 from her own ability and 1 from Inti. And then it gains trample until end of turn, which is great. And then Inti's second ability is whenever you discard 1 or more cards, which is what you do when you attack, you can exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card until your next end step. So this is just a little bit of card advantage as well. This allows you, very importantly, to 1, discard a card from your hand, which may be the card that Alesha wants to bring back. And it also gives you card advantage, giving you maybe another land drop that you might have missed otherwise, or a spell that you can play for cheap.
Yeah, I like Inti in this deck a lot. Plus, it comes down before your commander, so that's a very powerful set of moves to make at the beginning of the game. Like we hinted at With Inti here, you're going to need to be able to get creatures into your graveyard for your commander to bring them back. You can do this by discarding like we did with Inti, or you can include a little bit of self-mill. So taking your cards from your library, putting them directly into your graveyard. I like this on creatures specifically because you can bring them back with your commander.
Now, normally players might see something like mill and think, but why would I want to put cards from my library into my graveyard? I don't have access to them, or I can no longer draw them. What if that really sweet thing I need goes to the graveyard? Well, let me tell you, New Foundations players, mill is actually one of the strongest things you can do in graveyard decks because it treats your graveyard almost like another hand that you have access to. And when your commander very specifically wants to have cards in the graveyard, then great, milling is your friend.
Yeah, we're going to get things started with a classic. It's a Stitcher Supplier. It's a 1-mana black zombie. It's a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. And when it dies, you also mill 3 cards.
Yep.
So
put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard.
Easy. You start getting some creatures in your graveyard for your commander to bring back. And if you block with your Stitcher Supplier, it's a great thing to bring back to get you some more selection if you're looking for a more powerful creature to reanimate.
Yeah, even if it's just discarding it to an effect like Inti that we just talked about and reanimating it, just getting your engine going is the way that this deck really gets powerful in the later turns. Another very similar effect is Undead Butler, which costs 1 in the black and is also a zombie. And when it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards. And if you want those cards back, guess what? When Undead Butler dies, you may exile it. When you do, you return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So this might be a card that you want to cast because it's really cheap and you don't bother reanimating it with your commander. Or it could be something that you want to have just to hold in your hand for later because maybe your commander has died. Who knows?
It's nice to have that flexibility there.
Yeah.
One of my favorite self-mill engines lately has been Barrowgoyf. It's 2 in a black for a creature Lurgoyf with Death Touch and Lifelink. Its power is equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. Whenever Barrowgoyf deals combat damage to a player, you may mill that many cards. If you do, you may put a creature card from among them into your hand. Woo! This is doing a lot for you. You're a self-mill deck, so you already care about having things in your graveyard, so that means your Barrowgoyf will be nice and big. It also mills you, gains you some life, it's a great blocker, and it returns creatures from your graveyard to your hand to keep your engine churning.
Yeah, Barrowgoyf is awesome. Now, there is a little bit of math that you have to do here by having everyone count all the different card types in their graveyard. So it's a little bit annoying, but once you have that going, you can usually just indicate it with a dice. And then if a new card type enters the graveyard, you just take that dice up to know how big your Barrowgoyf is.
I also really like 3-drops in this deck because your commander attacks and gets that counter right away. So you can always reanimate a 3-drop as long as your commander has attacked.
All right. Another great milling engine is a new one from Duskmorn that just came out recently. This is an Overlord of the Balemerc. Now, normally this is a 3 black 5-mana spell, but it's got a special ability called Impending, which you have to just pay 1 in the black for, and it puts it on the battlefield, but it's not a creature yet. And it has 5 counters on it, and those begin to tick down like an impending doom, and eventually it does enter the battlefield. But notably, when it enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards, and then you may return a non-avatar creature card or a planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So late on in the game, this might be in your graveyard. You can reanimate it with Alesha. But early on, even as early as turn 2, you can pay 1 in the black, get this down, mill a bunch, and get another card from your graveyard to your hand.
It'll sit on your battlefield as an enchantment and eventually become a threat in the later game.
Yeah.
I've played with this card a lot, and it has felt incredibly powerful.
Yeah, 1 in the black to mill 4, return a card is just playable by its own, and the fact that it becomes a creature later on is just gravy on top.
If you don't want to mess around with all of this self-mill and hope that you hit something awesome, you can also put some creatures from your library directly into your graveyard.
Yeah.
Buried Alive is a very powerful card. It's 2 in a black for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, and then shuffle. So if you know exactly what card you wish was in your graveyard, you can cast Buried Alive, search your library, put them in the graveyard, and reanimate it that very same turn with your commander.
Yeah, commander decks have 100 cards in them, and oftentimes milling 3, milling 4, you're not going to see the card that you were really excited about. So Buried Alive is a slightly more powerful effect. It's a tutor, and it tutor cards directly to your graveyard, and then you can get exactly what you want for your Alesha to pull back and get going real fast. Now, there's another mean thing you can do in this deck, and it's just getting cards into your graveyard that may already be on the battlefield, or you want a recurrent effect that helps make sure that you can always be swinging with Alesha and not get blocked. And that is a card like Accursed Marauder. So this is 1 in the black. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. This can sacrifice itself. This can sacrifice something else on your board that you want to reanimate. But most importantly, this is just one of those effects that when Alesha recurs the Accursed Marauder, it makes everyone sack again. And you can keep doing that turn by turn, and when you have 3 opponents, everyone sacking 1 creature is pretty powerful. People do consider this to be a little on the meaner side of things, but if you're looking to sort of push that edge and that boundary, cards like Buried Alive and the Cursed Marauder are great ways to keep the board under control, especially if all your opponents have 5/5s and 6/6s that you can't get an attack through, because you have to attack with your commander.
Yeah, this makes for a very powerful engine and a clear battlefield for your commander. Finally, we need some stuff to reanimate. We've mentioned a few of them, but there's lots of options in decks like this at a variety of mana values.
Yeah.
So I would think you want some 2 mana things, some 3 mana things in this deck so you can reanimate it the very turn your commander comes down, because your commander does not have to be the one that attacks to trigger it. So if you have a creature like Blood Tithe Harvester, for example, it's black and a red for a vampire. When it enters, you create a blood token, and then you can tap and sacrifice Blood Tithe Harvester, and target creature gets -X/-X until the end of turn, where X is twice the number of blood tokens you control, activate only as a sorcery. So this is great in this deck for a couple of reasons. You can play this vampire before your commander and attack with it the turn she comes down, and then you can reanimate a creature right away if you're already set up in your graveyard. You can even discard something with that blood token to get something into your graveyard to reanimate. Or you can fill your deck up with 3-drops that you can reanimate right away after the turn that your commander attacks. Give yourself a little bit more room to get some stuff in your graveyard.
Yeah, I like that. Playing a 2-drop before your commander means you will be able to attack the turn your commander comes down, and in that case, you just need something with 2 mana value or less, like a Blood Tithe Harvester, that you don't care if it dies in combat, because you get it back, get another blood token, and just sort of keep it going.
It also has a great sacrifice ability to pick off some creatures early, so you can sacrifice it, recur it on your end step, and then you can remove another thing next turn.
Yeah, that's great. Other great cards here. This one's a fun one. Voldaren Thrillseeker. It's a vampire warrior that costs 2 and a red and has a cool ability called Backup 2 on it. So when the creature enters the battlefield, you put 2/1/1 counters on another creature, including itself, on any creature, target creature. And then if it's another creature, it gains the ability of the Voldaren Thrillseeker. So it kind of like gives it its power for a turn. And the power in this case would be an ability that you pay 1, sacrifice this creature, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So this is a great card to recur because it comes down, you put 2/1/1 counters on something, you pay 1 mana, sack it, kill something, or hit a player in the face, and then that creature is now sitting in your graveyard waiting to get recurred with Alesha. So it's got removal on it, it's got this really flexible ability, and the Voldaren Thrillseeker, if you reanimate it, gets to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah, you can put those counters on your commander and reanimate something bigger next turn.
That's a great point. You can just make your commander bigger immediately by giving it 2/1/1 counters.
Something like a Mindblade Render, I think, is cool in this deck. It's whenever your opponents are dealt combat damage, if any of that damage was dealt by a warrior, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. This is a warrior itself, but so is your commander, importantly. So this is a 2-mana creature you can play on turn 2. You can follow it up with your commander on turn 3. You can attack with both. If you connect, you draw some cards. If they block it, you can reanimate the Mindblade Render that turn. Gives you a little bit of warrior synergy and just gives you a cheap creature that you can recur always.
Yep, I like that a lot. Okay, those are some small creatures. Let's talk about the fun stuff, the big creatures. There's a lot of great creatures that come out every single year in Magic the Gathering. Olivia Crimson Bride. Olivia is one of those cards that has an ability that when it attacks, you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So it's a redundant effect for your commander. And it gains the ability that when you don't control Legendary Vampire, exile this creature. So as long as Olivia is around, you're getting twice the amount of reanimation in every graveyard. You're already attacking every single turn, and you're just going to slap people in the face pretty hard.
Yeah, the way this deck wins is in combat by recurring powerful threats. So having 2 abilities that do that makes it awesome. There's a couple of big creatures right in Foundations, if this is your first product, that you could throw right into this deck and they'd be at home. A classic threat in Commander is Etali Primal Storm.
Yeah.
4 red for a legendary elder dinosaur. Whenever Etali attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. if you can attack with it even once. And if your opponents can kill it, well, you can bring it back.
Yeah. Atali is just one of those threats that when it happens, everyone wants to remove it. But if you're able to bring it back over and over again, oh my goodness.
Doesn't feel good to remove it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good to remove it. Another reprint in Foundations is Runescarred Demon. This is a 7-mana, 6/6 flyer demon that when it enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and shuffle. It's going to be hard to get your commander up to 7 power, but we've just listed a bunch of ways that bump it up to 5 on the turn it comes out. So this is one of those cards, again, just even late in the game, just playing it by itself means that you can tutor for a card from your library. It's just very powerful. And, you know, if you open a bunch of Foundations packs and just happen to get one of them, throw it in the deck. It would be great there.
Yeah. This is better if you're focusing more on like the equipment plan and you're trying to get her power very, very high.
Yeah. So that is Alesha who laughs at Fate because Fate says, put it in the graveyard. And Alesha says, ha ha, bring
That's
it right
where
back.
I wanted it.
Yeah, over and over and over
That was my plan
again.
all along.
Okay.
Another big focus of the Foundation set is kitties.
Yay, nice.
There's a whole lot of new cats, including a very powerful legend that we know and love. He lost a color, though.
Yeah, Arahbo, the first Fang, is now a mono white cat commander, right at home in Rachel's life. It's 2 and a white for a legendary creature cat avatar. That's 2/2. And it has what we call an anthem effect. It says other cats you control get +1/+1. So any card that after it says creature dash cat gets +1/+1.
Pretty sweet.
Whenever Arahbo or another non-token cat you control enters, you create a 1/1 white cat creature token. But it's not just a 1/1 because it's a cat. It will actually be a 2/2 as long as your commander Arahbo is on the battlefield.
This is so powerful right away. I mean, it's 3 mana. You get Arahbo, who's a 2/2. You get the token that's also a 2/2.
Immediately.
And cats are cheap, so it's going to be easy to cast a lot of cats. They're all going to be buffed by your commander, and you'll be able to swing out for the win.
All you have to do is cast cats in this deck, and you are already doing pretty good.
So the plan is to fill your deck with cat creatures. Luckily, there's a lot of these in Foundation, so it'll make it easy, but there's a lot of powerful ones over the years as well. But let's talk about the ones that you may have opened if you've been opening this Foundation product, including Helpful Hunter.
Yay.
1 and a white for a cat. He's a 1/1. Whenever this creature enters, draw a card.
It's super cute. It's super amazing. Cards like this, you think, oh, these aren't that impressive, but it is great in Commander. You'll see people playing cards like this in even very powerful Commander decks. It's a cat, so it synergizes with your Commander. It's a 2/2 when your Commander's out. And when it enters, you just draw a card. So you're refilling your hand. You're in mono white, so that card draw is very important. Mono white doesn't have access to a lot of different ways to refill their hands.
And you get a free cat token off of it. So this is 2 mana for 2 creatures.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Another new one in this set is Sky Knight Squire.
This cat can stand.
What this cat has just 2 legs. 1 and a white for a 1/1 cat scout. Whenever another creature you control enters, perfect, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature.
Perfect.
As long as this creature has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has flying and is a knight in addition to its other types.
Yeah, so this is just potentially the card that kills your opponents in a deck like this. Every time you put a cat out on the battlefield, you get a cat and a token thanks to your commander. That's 2 1/1 counters on Sky Knight Squire. Very quickly and very easily, this would be like a 5/5, a 6/6, a 7/7 flyer in the air for just 2 mana.
Yeah, he comes in with a free cat, so you get that counter right away, as long as your commander is on the battlefield, of course. So you play him, you get a counter. The next thing you play is 2 more counters. He is flying already, and you can attack with him. That's going to be a very serious threat.
Yeah, another reprint in the set is Savannah Lions. This is like a classic Magic the Gathering card. It's a 1 mana for a 2/1 creature cat, and that's it. But in a deck like this, it's a 3/2 that brings another 2/2 onto the battlefield, and being able to cast a lot of little creatures and build out a big board state is kind of where a deck like this wants to be.
Yeah. Another one that is reprinted in Jumpstart Foundations is Brimaz, King of Ereskos. This is the original cat legend token maker. He's 1 white. So 3 mana altogether for a legendary cat soldier. He's a 3/4 with vigilance. Whenever he attacks, you make a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance that's attacking.
Oh, yeah.
And whenever Brimaz blocks a creature, create a 1/1 white cat soldier creature token with vigilance that's blocking that creature.
Yeah, so it's hard to attack you, and it's hard to get attacked by this because it's a 3/4 vigilance, so it doesn't need a tap to attack. So it's great on attack and defense.
With your commander out, this is such a serious threat. He's a 4/5 that makes a 2/2 2/2. That means you can block down any 6/6 and still keep your Brimaz in play.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
It's a very, very powerful combination if you get the two cat boys together.
Yeah. Other great cat cards, there's a card called Lion Sash. So new players, you may be wondering when you're dealing with a deck like Alesha that we just talked about, how do you stop them from popping off like that? Well, it's called Graveyard Hate. So this is an equipment cat that's an artifact creature. It's a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, it actually enters as a creature, and you at any time can equip the creature to another one to give it all the abilities. And it has an ability that's just 1 white mana to exile a target card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent card, so a land, a creature, an enchantment, a planeswalker, or an artifact, you put a 1/1 counter on Lion Sash. An equipped creature, if you decide to reconfigure this onto another creature, gets +1/+1 for each counter on Lion Sash. So, it's a pretty sweet card. It's just very flexible, and it also counts as a cat. But most importantly, you want to have answers like this in the mono white deck because you're in one color. You don't have access to as many effects as other colors do, and Graveyard Hate is almost always relevant these days in Commander.
This deck needs to be full of cheap, inexpensive cats to cast. So 1 mana cats, 2 mana cats are going to be the most powerful because you can keep making more and more tokens with your commander. Even something as simple as Sacred Cat, which is a 1 mana 1/1 with lifelink that has Embalm. So you can cast it from your graveyard and get another. It's not casted from it's an activated ability.
Yeah.
But you can make a token copy of it by exiling it from your graveyard. Gets you more cats on the battlefield in the late game. It comes with a free cat, so it's even better.
Yeah.
And that Anthem effect makes the lifelink really relevant.
Yeah, it becomes a 2/2. Very cool.
Something tricksy you can do with this cat is get White Mane Lion involved. It's a 1 and a white for a cat with flash. When it enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. It's a 2/2. So White Mane Lion, you can pay 2 mana, have a cat enter the battlefield, make a token with your commander Arahbo, then return that same White Mane Lion you've just cast back to your hand, and you can recast it as many times as you'd like, keep making 1/1 or 2/2 tokens with your commander as long as he's on the battlefield.
Yeah.
This is an engine all on its own.
Yeah, and there's oftentimes a lot of other cards that you want to use that is going to be able to get another enter the battlefield ability. But in this case, just bouncing the White Mane Lion back and forth is amazing. But it has flash, which also means it has instant speed. So let's say someone goes to target your commander with a removal spell. You can play White Mane Lion, and then it's going to create a token because you're your commander, and then you can use White Mane Lion's ability to rescue your commander by bouncing it to your hand, and then the removal spell does nothing. So it's got a lot of utility on it. Late in the game, if you just have like 8 mana, you can cast this 4 times, make 4 1/1s with your commander, and just build an instant board state. So a lot of flexibility there.
The most powerful cat that has ever been printed is also on the pricier end, but if you want to get fancy with Arahbo, you need to pick up an Ocelot Pride.
Yeah, this cat has a lot of text. Sorry, Foundation's new players. It's 1 mana for a 1/1 first strike lifelink cat, and it has Ascend. So if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing, and that just sort of affects the second ability of this cat, which says, at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, Ocelot Pride is a lifelinker, so if you swing with this cat, you gain some life. You create a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then you count up your permanents. Do I have 10 or more? If you do, great. You now have the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. If you have the City's Blessing, for each token you control that enter the battlefield this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. Ooh. So you get another 1/1 white cat from the Ocelot Pride, and then if your commander made, let's say, 2-3 tokens this turn, you get a copy of each one of those, and bam, you could go from like 6 cats to 15 in one turn.
It's a very, very powerful cat, and it's very inexpensive. Well, mana-wise.
To cast, yeah.
It's very expensive to pick up.
Yeah. There you go.
Because your commander is an Anthem effect, it's definitely showing that this deck wants as many creatures as possible on the board. He only buffs them a little bit, though, giving them +1/+1. We want lots of effects that give them plus power and toughness.
Yeah.
There's a new one in Foundation called Claws Out. It's 3 white for an instant, but it costs 1 less to cast for each cat you control. So it's easy for this just to be 2 white mana. And then it says creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. This is an instant, so you can do this after blocks. You can do this at any time it's convenient. And it's a huge power and toughness buff for only 2 mana.
Yeah, this is the kind of way that you win the game. You swing out with all your army of 2/2s, your opponents block as many as you can, and then you cast Claws out for 2 mana, and all of a sudden now your 5 power, your 6 power attack becomes a 20 power attack, and boom, you can wipe out a player at instant speed. So you're going to need a couple effects like this to close out the game in a deck like this. Another card in Foundations that's brand new is called Banner of Kinship. It's a 5 mana artifact. As this artifact enters, choose a creature type. Gonna choose cat. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. So if you have 5 cats, this enters with 5 fellowship counters. And that says creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact.
Oh, that is a huge pump effect.
Yeah, this might be one of the most powerful pump effects ever printed, actually, for a deck like this. For 5 mana, you might already have, let's say, 7, 8 cats on the battlefield. They instantly get +7, +7, +8, +8, whatever number of cats you have. And not just that, every new cat you play is also going to get that as long as the Banner of Kinship is around. So this is a great way on turn 5 or 6 to slam this down, turn your card sideways, and all of a sudden that creature your opponent had that was a 5/5 can't even block one of your cats anymore. And if they don't block it, they might take 24, 30 damage. That's sometimes not possible. So it's a great way to ensure also that an opponent's board state cannot withstand your attack, and they have to sacrifice some creatures to stop it.
Very powerful. A cat with an anthem built in is King of the Pride. This got reprinted in Foundations Jumpstart. It says other cats you control get +2/+1.
Yay! And then there's a lot of other cat cards in the history of cats and Magic. Turns out it's a very popular type of card. A card like Felidar Retreat is a really cool enchantment for 3 and a white, and it has an ability called Landfall. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose one of the choices. You either make a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or you get to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and they all gain vigilance until end of turn. So in a card, if you play a card like this and you're a brand new player, bring a set of dice, because you're going to want to be able to make sure all of your cats are properly represented with how big they are.
Mm-hmm. One that I think we can't get out of here without mentioning is Jazal Goldmane.
Yeah.
It's 2 white for a legendary cat warrior with first strike. He's a 4/4 naturally. He's got an activated ability that says 3 white, so you don't have to tap him to do this. Attacking creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of attacking creatures. This is exactly the kind of effect that you want. It's instant speed. It buffs for the number of cats you control, and you can do it multiple times if you have the mana to do so. So if you attack with 8 cats, like we said, you activate this ability. They all get +8/+8. If you activate it twice, they get +16/+16.
Yeah, wild.
Hugely powerful overrun, and he's a cat to boot.
Yeah, so you're going to want to run at least 2 or 3 of these overrun big attack type spells. We just named 3 of them here in this set review, but you're more than welcome to go online and look around and see if there's other cards that do a similar thing that are more your style. But yeah, having an Anthem effect, having an ability to really push stuff over the top is how this deck wins. How this deck loses, however, is when people destroy your cats. So I'm going to talk about protection really fast, and then we'll talk about some card draws. So protection means stopping players from murdering your stuff. When you have a huge board state of, let's say, 20 cats, and someone casts a board wipe, all of your hard work is gone and done for, and then you might just lose the game from that point out because you invested all the cards in your hand to sort of keep this up. So protection is a very important way to make sure that your go-wide decks stay alive. Do not die to board wipes. That's a very sad way, and also it's very sad with all those cats. So there's a lot of cards that do this in Magic. We'll mention a few of them here. Flawless Maneuver is sort of the classic new one. It's 2 and a white for an instant. If you control a commander, you actually get to cast this spell without paying its mana cost, and it says creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So Rachel casts a board wipe, a Wrath of God, a Day of Judgment. I cast Flawless Maneuver as an instant in response, and all my creatures don't die.
Oh, it's a miracle.
Hooray!
Clever Concealment does a similar thing. This is 2 white for an instant with Convoke, which means you can tap your lands to cast it, but you can also tap your creatures to cast it, which is great because you have a lot of cats.
So it could also be cast for free when you don't have the mana, technically.
Any number of target non-land permanents you control phase out.
Yo.
This is sort of a tricky concept, but basically it means that they disappear until your turn. They don't leave the battlefields. They don't go anywhere. They just sort of get lost in the fog.
Yeah, they kind of become like transparent, and then nothing can touch them, including those board wipes.
Pretty good.
A new card that's just very cheap to cast is Dawn's Truce. There's an ability to gift a card, so you can give an opponent a draw of a card when you cast this. But it just basically says you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. And then if you do gift a card, which you probably want to do, permanents you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. So you can choose the opponent that's the least threatening to give them that card out of the 3 that are there. And then you get that same effect at a cheap cost of 2 mana.
When I found that's perfect for this deck is, and they shall know no fear.
Hilarious.
1 and a white for an instant. It says choose a creature type. Cat. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn.
Yeah.
So this is both an anthem effect and board protection in a box.
Yep.
You probably want what, like 4 different cards that are card protection in your deck?
Yeah, and in this case, and they shall know no fear is amazing because it might also be a win con if you're attacking and just need to give all your cats +1/+0 and don't want them to die in combat. So this kind of serves a little bit of 2 purposes, and those are always very powerful in decks like this. So yeah, at least 3, probably more, because your entire deck hinges around your cats not dying.
Cats are known for a lot of things. The ability to fly is not one of them. You're going to make a lot of cats, but you really want to make sure they connect. And a way to do that is to destroy all of your creatures' blockers before you attack with all of your cats. And a great card for this kind of thing is Everything Comes to Dust. 7 white for a sorcery with Convoke.
White. This is 10 mana spell.
10 mana altogether, but it has Convoke, so you can tap your cats to cast it. Exile all creatures except those that share a creature type with a creature that convoked this spell. All artifacts and all enchantments.
Woo-wee.
So you would convoke it with a cat.
Just 1 cat, by the way. You don't have to do more. You probably do, though, because it's a 10 mana spell.
Yeah. And then you exile all of your opponent's hard work, and it's quiet, and there's nothing except for you and your cats. And then you've got a free attack and a decent buff from your commander that you can do some damage while your opponents are still rebuilding.
Yeah, and exiling stuff is extra powerful because with cards like Alesha that we talked about earlier, they cannot get those cards back from the exile zone.
Yeah, or if they have something like Dawn's Truce, which gives them indestructible. Exile doesn't care.
Yeah, and then finally, there's also a card called Hour of Reckoning. This is 4 white. It also has Convoke, so you can cast it for cheaper. And it says destroy all non-token creatures. So this might blow up your commander, but if you have, let's say, 15 cats on the battlefield, you might be able to recast your commander after this, or doesn't even matter. That might be enough to end the game on the spot.
Pretty sweet.
Okay.
As much as you want this deck to be absolutely full of cats, you do need to make sure you have plenty of card draw to draw the cats you want to cast.
Yes.
Something like Skull Clamp feels heretical and sad, but it's very powerful. It's a 1 mana equipment that says equipped creature gets +1/-1, and whenever an equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. Equip for 1. So if you can equip one of your 1/1 cats, not possible when you have your commander on board, but if your commander's not there, then you're definitely going to want to draw some cards.
Oh, yeah.
That cat dies, you draw 2 more cards. You can equip it and attack with it. If they block it, you draw 2 cards. It's a huge amount of card draw in any token deck.
Yeah, Skull Clamp is just one of those classic cards. Another classic card in a mono-white token deck would be Idol of Oblivion. This is the 2 mana artifact. You tap it, draw a card, activate only if you create a token this turn. So this pretty much guarantees you get at least 1 extra card every single turn. And then later on in the game, you can tap it for 8, tap it, sacrifice it to make a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. But I've honestly never, ever seen this happen.
I haven't, no.
You can kind of ignore that part of it. White's really great at drawing cards when small creatures enter the battlefield. Tokasi is welcoming vampire. A lot of things being welcomed here are both cards that allow you to draw cards when another creature, either with a specific power or a mana value, enters the battlefield. And these usually only trigger once per turn. But again, just getting 2 cards a turn is going to be very powerful because that's allowing you to keep up with the rest of the board. Some players are going to have some nutty card draw abilities. So you want to have something that at least keeps you in the loop.
One I really like for this deck is Vanquisher's Banner. It's a 5 mana artifact that it enters. You choose cat. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Again, another anthem effect. And whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card.
Love it.
This is a very expensive card draw piece, but good thing that cats are so cheap. We've got a lot of 1 mana and 2 mana cats that you can cast, trigger your Vanquisher's banner, and refill your hand so you can cast more cats, make more cats, kill your opponents with all your cats.
Yeah, there's a great way to play this, and then you play 3 1/1 cats, draw 3 cards. It's very powerful in a deck like this because a lot of your cards, again, cost very cheap. And when your card says play it, draw a card, that makes it infinitely better. Okay, so there are so many other cards that fit into typal decks that are in mono white or any of the colors. We might mention this a couple times, but there are amazing websites out there. There are also other deck lists you can look at with similar commanders. EDHREC.com is what we usually recommend. And if you just scroll through the site, you can sort by mono white tokens, and you can just see all of the other options that you have. So get yourself acquainted with it if this is your playstyle. Okay.
All right. We've got a couple more commanders to talk about this episode, but before we get into those, first we're going to hear a few words from our sponsors.
Listen up, fleshbags! You're in the domain of the Lord of Pain! The Lord of Pain less for high-quality audio, that is, with RAYCON wireless earbuds! Look, it can be torture finding things in life that just work how they're supposed to. So when my coffee maker's on the fritz or my Iron Maiden gets stuck shut, I throw them in the pit. But you know what never causes a fuss like that? RAYCON's best-selling everyday earbuds! They just work, and RAYCON keeps making them better and easier than ever. Their new multi-point connectivity lets me pair with 2 devices at once, so I can switch seamlessly from listening to the screams from the rack on my phone to the crunching of Black Vice on my laptop. RAYCON start at just half the price of the other guys, so they're already an incredible deal, even before you factor in their Black Friday offer of up to 30% off site-wide. And with a 32-hour battery life, they can last even longer than my victims!
It's time to save big for Black Friday. Go to buyraycon.com/command today to get up to 30% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 30% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/command.
This episode is sponsored by Etsy.
All right, and then I'm going to play Into the Floodmaw, and Rachel, I will gift you a tapped fish.
Thanks.
What?
I mean, it's fun.
It's a pretty impersonal gift, Josh.
What about Rachel says tapped fish to you?
I mean, it's the gift on the card.
Look, if you want to give personalized gifts to people that they'll actually like, you should try shopping on Etsy. It's easy to find original gifts on Etsy that'll make whoever you're shopping for this holiday season feel extra special.
So you'll get that big, excited reaction you're hoping for the moment they open their present.
The shops on Etsy have all sorts of fun, customizable items, so you can put together a truly thoughtful gift.
I got my mom a mug with little sculpted versions of her dogs on it. She loves it.
Aww.
And I got my wife a beautiful vase with sculpted versions of Jordan's mom's dogs on it. She was confused.
We even used Etsy to find those Game Nights holiday blankets that everybody loved.
Oh yeah, I can do a ton of my holiday shopping on Etsy this year. But for now, bounce your ghostly prison, swing for lethal.
You got me.
For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
Oh, hello there. Admiring my trophies? Yes, it's me, multi-format staple tireless tracker, and I've tracked some mighty fine beasts. The Balos of Zendikar, the Great Horns of Ikoria, Yargle. But there's one thing I haven't been able to track. Where all my hard-earned cash keeps going. That's why I signed up for Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Their clear dashboard makes it super easy to craft a personal budget. Plus, it clued me into a bunch of things I forgot I was even paying for, like membership to my old gym that got destroyed by the Phyrexians. But Rocket Money tracked it down and did the most tiring part of it all, calling customer service and canceling it. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So get a clue about your finances and sign up for Rocket Money.
Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/command-zone. That's rocketmoney.com/command-zone. Again, rocketmoney.com/command-zone. And then I'm going to flash out Illusory Ambusher. I will bolt it to draw 3 cards. I will sneak attack out Triskaidekaphile. I'm going to go to my upkeep and I will win the game.
That was your first time playing the deck?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first time in paper. I've already goldfished it like 100 times on ARCHIDEKT. Their playtester is super user-friendly. Playing cards just takes one click, and you can mulligan, tutor, and move through your turns with the press of a key. There are simple menus with counters and copies, and you can take notes on cards as you play them.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest Commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/command zone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/command zone.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Foundations episode. We're talking about the coolest commanders from Foundations, and we got a really powerful one coming up next.
Up next, we're going to talk about a very popular strategy in Commander. It's life gain. Elenda, Saint of Dusk. This is 2, a white and a black for a legendary vampire knight. She's a 4/4 with lifelink and hexproof from instants specifically. As long as your life total is greater than your starting life total, Elenda gets +1/+1 and has menace. Elenda gets an additional +5/+5 as long as your life total is at least 10 greater than your starting life total.
Right. So this could be a 10/10 commander, which is really powerful.
Yeah.
It just requires you to gain a lot of life. So you start at 40 in commander, you'd need to be at least at 50 life. But with life gain decks, it's often very easy to do so.
And she's got lifelink herself, so she
yes.
helps in that mission.
Yeah, the moment is she becomes a 5/5 and hits someone, you're pretty much going to gain enough life at that point to almost assuredly get to above 40. Hexproof from instant specifically means that she's only hexproof from cards that say instant on it, like Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile. So if someone casts a sorcery speed removal spell or a creature that can target removal, this does not have hexproof from that.
All right. There is a lot of cool life gain cards in this deck. But first, we want to talk about how this deck wins because it's kind of a unique thing for Commander.
Yeah.
Elenda is a high power commander, which means that your plan is likely going to be trying to kill your opponents with commander damage. In Commander, if you've dealt 21 points of combat damage to your opponent with your commander, that's enough to knock them out of the game, no matter how much life they've gained or anything else. It's a commander damage win. So this is sort of a Voltron style commander, which means you're trying to make her as big as possible and take your opponents out in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and if you don't do that, just making her huge and attacking with her and getting at a really high life total is the alternate way this deck wins, which is just you're going to last a longer amount of time in the game than your opponents because you just have so much life. As a result, you can swing more freely, you can take more hits, and you're not as threatened to be at like 10, 15 life where one attack might kill you. That also means, though, that players would typically see the life gain player and target them first. So just be aware that this is a bit of a tricky balance to play in-game, but when it does work, it's very fun.
All right, a very powerful life gain piece that was printed for the first time in Foundation is Bloodthirsty Conqueror.
This card's crazy.
3 black for a 5/5 with flying and death touch. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life.
Yeah, so this means that if your opponents are attacking each other, you're going to be gaining that life, which is absurd.
It's so powerful.
If you hit, this kind of pseudo gives all of your creatures a lifelink as well, because when they hit your opponent specifically, they will also gain you that much life. This is a flying death toucher, so if this swings at someone for 5 and doesn't get blocked, you gain 5 life. Woo!
Pretty nuts. There's lots of ways to gain life, but that is going to do it very quickly and probably draw some removal spells away from your very important commander.
A reprint in Foundation is Authority of the Consuls. This is just a 1-mana enchantment that says creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, which is really important in a deck like this because it means that they can't play blockers, essentially, until they untap on the next turn. You might have a threatening Elenda out or a Bloodthirsty Conqueror. They go, okay, cool, I'll play 3 flyers, but they all enter the battlefield tapped, which means that you get at least one turn to swing at them and they don't get to build that blocker base up.
Yeah, and remember your commander has menace when your life total is 10 over your starting life total. So
No,
she
just
has a little evasion too.
just 1 over your starting life total.
Just 1?
Yeah, she
The
gains
10
menace.
Yeah. The 10 is just the
+5/+5
plus 5/+5.
Yeah.
So she gets menace right away as long as you're above 40.
Yeah, and it also says in Authority of the Consuls, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. So
Nice.
getting this out in turn 1, you're almost guaranteed to get above your starting life total by the time you're ready to cast your commander.
All right, there's lots of ways to gain life in Commander. The most popular ones are Soul Sisters. There's Soul Warden, which says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. That's under your control, under your opponent's control. Any creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life on a 1 mana creature.
Yeah, except if it's not in the game you're playing. If it's like the game next to you,
that's
that
true. That
doesn't
doesn't
count.
count.
Yeah, don't pay attention to that. And then there's a new card called Guide of Souls, which gives a very similar ability, but it's only when creatures enter the battlefield under your control. And you also get some energy counters that you can spend to make creatures bigger. We won't read that part of the ability because it's a lot of text.
But it does give your commander flying.
Yeah.
Which, if you,
You know what,
have
it's
enough
relevant.
creatures, it is quite relevant.
Whenever you attack, you may pay 3 energy. So this means having 3 creatures enter the battlefield under your control with the Guide of Souls out. You can pay 3 and then you get to put 2 1/1 counters and a flying counter on the target attacking creature. And it also becomes an angel. So your commander will now be potentially a 8/8 flyer.
No, 12/12 if
12/12.
you're all the way up.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. So that is a way to win the game, obviously, through commander damage. Flying is usually a way to at least hit 1 player at the table. In the 15 years I've been playing Commander, having 1 flying creature out, you're almost guaranteed to have an attack on an opponent.
Mm-hmm. So those are very powerful effects in decks that make a lot of creatures enter the battlefield. It'll gain you a lot of life as long as you're putting a lot of creatures onto the battlefield.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to gain life if you're trying to go in a less creature-focused route. One that I like a lot is Cabal Consul of Allocation. 1 white and a black for a legendary human advisor. It says whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life.
Whew.
That happens a lot, and a lot of the time they will ignore it. They will be annoyed, but they will ignore it, and you will continue to gain life throughout
the game. Similar effects, Sangromancer, 2 black. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life, and then whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life.
If there's wheels or if they're just
there is,
hand
yeah.
sides.
The board wipes plus a Sangromancer means that they might board wipe, and you'll all of a sudden gain 30 life, 40 life. Well, that's not a multiple of 3. You get what I'm saying, 42 life. But Sangromancer is very powerful and very annoying because, again, it's just one of those cards that your opponents, they look at and they go, well, it's gaining you life, but I can get around that, but I can't get around some other thing with this removal spell, so I'm going to remove that instead. And so you're just going to have a Sangromancer or a combo out for a long time. But again, these are the types of effects that make players look at you and go, all right, well, Jimmy's now at 65 life. I'm going to have to do something about that. But sometimes it's not enough.
Absolutely. Though sometimes those life totals get out of hand. A great way to gain a ton of life all at once is to cast a spell like Exsanguinate, X black. Each opponent loses X life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way.
Yeah, so each opponent.
If X is 4, then each opponent loses 4 and you gain 12.
Nice.
It's a great way to gain a huge chunk of life all at once to maybe buff your commander out of nowhere and take somebody out.
Yeah, and Exsanguinate can also just be one of those, I have only a couple of draws in my deck at this late point in the game to save me, and this is one of them because my opponent's at 5, the other opponent's at 7, and it could just kill everyone on the spot.
Still, even if you have your opponent fully buffed, she's a 10/10, that is not enough to get your opponents out with commander damage. So we're going to need some double strike, we're going to need some additional buffs to make sure that we can take out your opponents one turn after another.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cards that give double strike, so it deals both first strike and regular damage. It kind of goes shing shing and hits them twice. Chroma's Will is a classic that you can cast and use both the abilities if you have your commander. 3 and a white for an instant. Creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn, which is pretty good. But also, if you have your commander out, you can choose the second ability, or if you don't have your commander, you get choose one of them. Creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from each color until end of turn. So protection from each color typically means that your creatures are unblockable unless they have like artifact creatures out. It's again just 2 ways to give evasion, and the first way gives evasion plus double strike. If you hit someone with your commander already once, that double strike is probably going to be enough to take them out.
Yep. Duelist Heritage does a similar thing. Whenever 1 or more creatures attack, you may have target creature gain double strike until end of turn. That's your commander, of course, but that also could be any creature attacking, including your opponents.
Yeah, on their turn. So
you'd be
it gives
you're attacking them, I'll give your creature double strike as a little present for not attacking me.
Yeah, because I have 70 life and you shouldn't look at me. Fire Shrieker is another way to give double strike. That's an equipment. That's just 3 mana to cast and 2 to equip. And then there's also Flaming Fist, which is a enchantment background. Commander creatures you own have whenever this creature attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn. You'll love it to see it.
Yep. Now Menace, double strike, lifelink. This is a huge scary commander. you're still they're incentivized to block it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I can't take 10 damage from your commander. That's almost halfway to commander damage.
And if they have tokens out, they're very easily thrown in front as little chump fodder.
So having a little bit of evasion in your deck to make sure that your opponent can slip through or to make sure your commander can slip through their defenses is going to be very important.
Yeah, a classic one is Whisper Silk Cloak. This is an equipment that costs 3, equips for 2, and it says equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud, so it can no longer be the target of any spells or abilities, including your own, by the way. Trailblazer's Boots is another equipment that only costs 2 to cast and 2 to equip, but it has non-basic land walk. So as long as the defending player has a non-basic land, it cannot block this creature. In Commander games, this is almost always the case.
Yeah.
And then finally, a new card is Commander's Plate.
I don't know if this one counts as new anymore.
Yeah, kind of newish, yeah. Newer than
Legends?
Whisper Silk Cloak, that's for sure. It's an artifact equipment that only costs 1 to cast, and it says equipped creature gets +3/+3 and has protection from each color that's not in your commander's color identity. So in this case, it's every other color outside of black and white. It only costs 3 to equip your commander, and this pretty much usually, again, means that you can at least have one player at the table you can hit with your commander.
All right. There is some sweet life gain synergy that came out in Foundation. We want to mention some of those. If you're opening that product, Exemplar of Light is 2 white for an angel. Whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And then whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on this creature, draw a card. It only triggers once each turn. But if you have something like a Soul Sister that gains you 1 life whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you could draw a card on every single turn. This creature gets bigger and bigger and draws you 1 card.
Yeah, this card is like instantly one of the best cards ever printed in mono white, right?
I mean, in life gain decks, if you have this kind of effect in your deck, you're definitely putting Exemplar of Light in your deck.
Yeah, that card just seems very, very powerful. There's also a card called Cat Collector. We were talking about cats earlier. It's 2 and a white for a 3/2 human citizen. When it enters, you create a food token, which is a little artifact you can pay to and tap it to sacrifice to gain 3 life. And it says whenever you gain life for the first time during each of your turns, you create a 1/1 white cat creature token.
Yeah.
So this is just a great way to keep building out your board. But also notably, if you have a card like a Soul Sister, it will gain you a bunch of life because it keeps coming in and creates 1/1s. You just have to have 1 instance of life gain first, and then boom, you make another little token that gains you another life. Yay.
Pretty sweet. These all sort of go best in that creature-focused Soul Sister build of this deck, but there is another version of this deck that benefits from gaining huge swaths of life, and that's probably if you're including the Bloodthirsty Conqueror. You can include something like Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. It says whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life.
Aha.
Now, that creates a bit of a combo because Bloodthirsty Conqueror says whenever your opponents lose life, you gain life. And Veto says the opposite. When you gain life, target opponent loses life. So you can drain out the table of all of their life at instant speed if you have both of those creatures on the battlefield.
Yeah, this is called an infinite loop. This will allow you to just constantly go back and forth between the 2 triggers and kill the table immediately. So if you have this in your deck, your opponents, if they don't know it's coming, will likely get got by it. But if they do know it's coming, that means that the moment you play one of these cards, the other one might be waiting in the wings. So that means your opponents will know to get rid of it as well.
It's a very scary effect for sure.
Yeah, Veto in general, when it shows up in a game, you have to be worried about that sort of circumstance.
All right. Up next is Elenda's Hierophant. This card's sweet. It says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda. And when she dies, you make 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is its power. Elenda also flies. So she's a big flying threat that bursts into a bunch of tiny vampires to defend your very important life total.
Yep. Very cool. I love Elenda's Hierophant. That's a great card. A new card that is a little on the pricey side, but very powerful and works great in white-black decks. It's Sorin of House Markov. A lot of abilities on here. It's a 1 and a black for a 1/4 legendary creature human noble. It has lifelink, but it also has an ability called Extort. And Extort is an ability that anytime you cast a spell, you can pay either a white or a black mana. And if you do, each opponent loses a life and you gain that much life. So it could be 3 life lost from your opponents and you gain 3 life from a single spell. And it has this cool ability. It says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, you get to exile Sorin and return it, transformed under their owner's control. And he becomes a planeswalker on the other side. Also,
Even more words.
Even more words, but also has Extort on the other side. The Planeswalker has a lot of abilities.
The second ability is what's important, though.
Yeah, the first one +2 creates a food token. The second one is -1. Sorin, Ravenous Neonate, deals damage equal to the amount of life you gain this turn to any target. So it's probably going to be at least 3, but it could be more.
Especially if you hit with your commander.
Yeah, and so you're just going to be hitting something. And again, it's any target. So it could be a player's face. It could be their biggest creature, whatever it is. And then -6, you get a gain control of a target creature, and it becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. And it gets a little lifelink counter if you control a white permanent other than that creature or Sorin. You're typically not going to get to the -6 part of it, but it is relevant. Normally, I think you flip Sorin and just kill something.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, it's the scariest thing on the board.
All right. That's Elenda. You're gaining a bunch of life. You're hitting him with a big vampire. Your life total is going up. Theirs going down. Ugh. It's so tough playing against life gain decks.
And lifelink is a very powerful strategy and one of the oldest ones around. So again, EDHREC, you can look up the theme of lifelink and see all the cards that fit within the white-black shell if this is the kind of jam that you like to put on your toast. Koma, World Eater! This is basically the world snake from Norse mythology, but put into a magic card. It's called Koma. And it'll put you in a coma because there's so much text on it. 3 green, green, blue, blue for an 8/12 legendary creature Serpent. This spell can't be countered. Sorry, opponents. It's got Trample and Ward 4. So if your opponent wants to target this with an ability, they got to pay 4 additional mana on top of it. So with Swords of Plowshares now costs 5. That sucks. And it says, whenever Koma deals combat damage to a player, create 4 3/3 blue serpent creatures tokens named Koma's Coil. So it's an 8/12 with Trample. It's going to be very hard for your opponents to block this without it trampling over for some amount of damage. And then when it does, you create 4 serpent tokens that are all 3/3s. That's a total of 12 additional power on the battlefield. This is a wild card because it costs a lot, but it also just has a ridiculously impactful ability.
All right. If you are playing a commander deck with a 7-mana commander, a majority of your deck is going to be ramp. You're going to have a lot of spells in the deck that are designed to make you more mana so you can cast your expensive spells earlier.
Yeah.
So you're going to want to include your 2-mana ramp, like Rampant Growth that searches your library for land, puts it into the battlefield tapped, Nature's Lore, Growth Spiral. All of these kind of do the same thing to get more lands on the battlefield faster, so you can get to your world-eating snake faster.
Yeah, you play Rampant Growth on turn 2. You get 3 lands on the battlefield. Turn 4, you play a land, and then you're going to want to play your 4-mana ramp, like Skyshroud Claim or Migration Path, both of which get 2 forests and put them on the battlefield or basic lands.
So you ramp on 2, get 1 land. You ramp on 3, get 2 more lands. Then the turn after that, you should have enough if you're hitting all your land drops to be able to cast your commander.
Yeah, so that is one path to getting to 7 mana. Another path is having ramp on 1 with cards like Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystics, which are both creatures that tap for mana. And then on turn 2, you have 3 mana to cast your Cultivates and Kodama's Reaches, which are 3 mana ramp spells that put 1 land on the battlefield and 1 into your hand. I personally prefer the land-based only ramp versions, as I'm sure you do as well, because creatures are a little more fragile, and there's a great chance that opponents will do everything they can to kill your Koma. And if they do, you're going to want to have lands on the battlefield as opposed to creatures, because one easy way to kill a Koma with Ward 4 is a board wipe.
Is a board wipe, for sure. I agree that I think squishy ramp like your mana creatures is just too delicate for a strategy that is trying to get to 1,000,000 mana.
It doesn't mean, however, that you don't play the 3-mana ramp in your deck as well, because getting the extra land in your hand to make sure you're always hitting your land drops is just as important. And there may be times when you don't get the 2 into the 4, but rather you just have the 3, and then you do the 4 mana after with the 2 on top, right? There's lots of ways to sort of combo your ramp together. But in a deck like this, you're not doing anything in the first few turns, ideally. You're just getting the lands out so that you can play your commander as soon as possible.
The next aspect of a deck like this is control. Make sure that your opponents aren't doing anything scarier than you, and make sure that they're not removing your precious Koma and all of his coils.
Yeah.
So stuff like counter spells, your basic counter spell that's blue, counter target spell, or a very popular commander counterspell like Arcane Denial, 1 in a blue counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep. You draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. That one replaces itself and keeps that board wipe from happening.
A new one that was, not a new one, a card that's reprinted in Foundation is an Offer You Can't Refuse, which only costs 1 blue mana for an instant. It says counter target non-creature spell. like a removal spell. And its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So it's cheap for you to cast. It gives them a little bit of an upside, but being able to hold up in a 1-mana counterspell is really powerful because a lot of times you don't have enough to play it and get 2 mana for another counterspell. So it's good to have those cheap alternatives as well.
Yeah, if you're going to cast a 7-mana commander, even one with as much protection as Koma, you really want to have some amount of protection held up to be able to protect your board in case the worst happens.
Yeah, in a deck like this, when Koma enters the battlefield, if it connects at least once, this creates such an insurmountable advantage oftentimes that it will take over the game. It has trample, it has ward, and it can itself be countered. So making sure you have protection for it is how you're going to make sure that you don't just get blown out by something and then all of a sudden your Koma costs even more and you've spent the whole game basically doing nothing.
Your deck is slow and revolves around one card, so knowing that you have the scariest permanent on the board means that your opponents are going to be coming for you. Have ways to protect your board, like counterspells, to prevent your opponents from winning, like counterspells, or just defense against them attacking you. You have to attack with your giant 8/12 to be able to get that value, and 4 3/3s are a lot, but it's not quite enough defense if the whole table decides to gang up on you.
Totally.
So I would pack some more in its instant speed interaction to defend yourself against combat as well. I like fogs, having something like a tangle that says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Each attacking creature does not untap during its controller's next untap step.
Wow.
Is an enormous blowout because it leaves them open to get attacked by your serpents or your Koma next turn.
And everyone else can also turn their sights on them as well. And sometimes that's enough just to delete a player out of the game, which is always the risk when you send all of your creatures at one player. You Look Upon the Tarask is a similar one. It's a 4 green instant. Choose one. You either prevent all combat damage to be dealt to you and creatures you control this turn. That's a fog. Or target creature gets +5/+5, gains indestructible until end of turn, and all creatures your opponents control able to block that creature this turn do so. So making your giant Koma into a 13/17 that everything your opponents have to block it. You actually don't care if that trample gets in because this could just be a one-sided board wipe for you.
Just wipes their whole board. This card is expensive. It is. And I put it in decks knowing it was expensive, but it does so much for you that I think it's worth it here. It can be a one-sided board wipe. You're right. Like it can destroy all of their creatures. It can protect Koma from board wipe because it can make him indestructible at instant speed. And it can defend you against all of the hate that will come your way once Koma's on the battlefield.
Yeah, and 5 mana isn't as scary when half your deck is ramping to a 7 mana spell, right? Another great one is Perplexing Test. This is 3 blue for an instant. It says choose one, return all creature tokens to their owner's hand, or return all non-token creatures to their owner's hand.
More likely that one.
Yeah, more likely that one because it's okay for you to, for instance, have Koma hit a few times. Now you have 12 coils out. Perplexing Test, bounce everything after your combat or beforehand, and then all of your tokens are entering in for 3/3 damages. It's going to kill someone, and then just replaying your Koma as soon as you can because you're going to have a ton of mana in this deck.
Yeah, for sure. Aetherize is a great one that was reprinted in Foundations. It returns all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. It's like, oh, you came for me? Well, I'm a control deck. I'm ready for you.
See you later. Now, in this deck, if you have the original Koma, Serpent of the Cosmos, I believe. That's a great include because it allows you to sacrifice your tokens to make things indestructible. But just having that kind of protection is generally very good. So Heroic Intervention is another way to make your board indestructible for very, very cheap. 1 in the green for an instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn.
Yeah.
It's one of those classic, if I cast this, I'm so sorry, but that means I'm going to win the game now because you all blew everything trying to kill me.
Yeah, I really like Slip Out the Back in this deck. It's a 1 mana instant in blue that says put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It phases out. The only thing you have to protect is Koma if there's a board wipe. So if you can phase it out, it can't be exiled, it can't be destroyed, it can't be bounced. And now, again, there's this huge blowout where everybody lost their whole board. You kept Koma untap and with him and get to attack right away.
Yeah. And because, again, you're building your whole deck basically around Koma, it's going to be hard for you to put cards in there that don't benefit what Koma's doing. So going over the top, ending the game because Koma is your singular win condition means you want to support things like token creation. So Second Harvest is 2 green for an instant, and it says for each token you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So if you have 6 3/3s out, now you get 12. A card like EDHREC and Nev Twin Casters is in the same colors. It's 2 green and a blue, has Ward 2, and it says if one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many are created instead.
So you'd make 8.
8, yeah.
Another popular way to make Koma go over the top, just check out the Kaldheim Game Nights episode, is cloning Koma.
Cloning, yeah.
There's a brand new one that's very, very powerful with this one. It's Auton Soldier. 4 blue for an artifact, creature, alien, soldier. It's brand new. Again, this is from Doctor Who. You may have Auton Soldier enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it isn't legendary and is an artifact in addition to its other types and has Myriad.
Yay! So whenever a creature with Myriad attacks, it goes, cool, I'm attacking one player, and now I'm going to create a copy of myself attacking the other players. And so that means you're going to have 3 Komas attacking minimum if you don't swing with your actual commander. If you have your actual commander attacking, then you have 4 Komas swinging. That's 4 8/12s going around the board. You may make an insane amount of tokens when this happens.
Yeah, right. 4 is 16 3/3s.
Yeah, and then at the end of combat, they do get exiled, so you don't get to keep the tokens. But this means every single time you attack,
well, you keep the serpent tokens.
yeah,
you don't keep the Koma
tokens.
tokens.
Yeah, you're going to make a ton of tokens, and then your Koma copies go away. But this Auton Soldier is just sitting there going, ha ha ha.
Let's
Bring
do it
on.
again.
Let's do it
next
again.
Turn.
I have Ward 4, and now I'm holding up Heroic Intervention, so I don't think you're going to win.
There are more and more clones that allow you to keep your legendaries around. Spark Double, Irenicus's Vile Duplication, all can copy legendary creatures and let you keep that copy rather than having it die to the legendary rule.
Because it isn't legendary, the copies. They are basically, which is very powerful because in Commander, if you have 2 legendary creatures, like you clone one of, and it's the same name, you can only keep one on the board. Actually, not just in Commander, in Magic in general.
Yeah. Finally, you're going to need some card draw, and a good thing you're in the 2 best colors to do it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Elemental Bond says whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. That means Koma draws you a card. That means when Koma hits, it draws you 4 cards. A disaster for your opponents.
Yep.
Or something like Tribute to the World Tree does a very similar thing. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card.
Yep. And then similar to Perplexing Test earlier, because you have tokens, you can cast a card like Whelming Wave. That's a sorcery for 2 blue. Return all creatures to their owner's hand except for Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents.
That's the winner right there.
One-sided board wide.
For 4 mana. Pretty good. Well, that's Koma. I mean, the main thing about this deck is you're going to need the mana to cast Koma and defend Koma on the same turn you cast it. So play your counter spells, play your protection spells, and ramp.
Yeah, this is the type of deck, too, that once you play it 3 or 4 times, your play group will go, oh, not again. Because it's quite hard to beat.
It's less powerful than the original Koma, but still quite powerful. All right, up next is a friend. An old friend?
An old, I mean, geez, what's old these days?
It's Kykar, Zephyr, Awakener.
This is 2 white and a blue for a 3/4 legendary creature, Bird Wizard. It's got flying, and it says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to choose one of 2 abilities. The first one says, exile another target creature you control, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And the second ability you could choose is to create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying.
So this is a very, very fixed Displacer Kitten.
Yeah. It's a very powerful card, however. The ability is called Flickering. The card leaves the battlefield and comes back, in this case, at the beginning of the next end step.
So the way that you build a deck like this is you're going to fill it with creatures that have abilities that trigger when it enters the battlefield and cheap non-creature spells that mean you can do this multiple times per turn with multiple creatures. And also you can do this at instant speed. So you can use it to protect your creatures, all of them except Kykar, and you can use them to reuse those ETBs.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is creatures with enter the battlefield triggers. One that I think is going to be the most powerful in this deck is Archaeomancer.
Yeah, this is just a 2 blue creature that's a 1/2 human wizard, and when it enters the battlefield, you return an instant or a sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So every single time you spend an instant or sorcery or some other non-creature, that's a way to get Kykar to flicker something. And when it goes to the graveyard, you're like, hey, maybe I want that Brainstorm back or that 1 mana spell. Archaeomancer sits there and now is just able to continually bounce itself thanks to Kykar's ability, return those cards to your hand so you can reuse them over and over and over again.
You can also do this with creatures that draw cards when they enter the battlefield, like a Spirited Companion. It's just a 2-mana dog that when it enters, you draw a card.
Yep, there was a cat that we talked about earlier that did the same thing. You can also get a little flexible with it. A card like Ether Channeler is a 2/1, and it has 3 abilities that you can choose from when it enters the battlefield. The first one, very similar to Kykar's, is it makes a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. The second one, which is very powerful, is return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And the third one is draw a card. So you decide what's the most important. Did your opponent just spend 8 mana on a crazy non-creature permanent? Great. Or non-land? Great. You can bounce that to their hand and set them back a whole turn. Or you might just draw a card. Who knows?
One of the most powerful enter the battlefield triggers in the game is Peregrine Drake, which enters and untaps up to 5 lands.
Yeah, this is insane with your commander because you play this on turn 5 after your commander's out. You untap 5 lands, and now you have a grip full of cards that might be instants that you can play to bounce and flicker this card. Get those lands back, retap them for something else, get the Peregrine Drake back, untap your lands, and retap them again for something else.
Yeah, this puts you in a very controlling position when you always have mana open and you always have a creature that can draw you more cards and you can always protect your board. Kykar is going to be a very difficult card to get through as long as you have the cards in your hand if you're playing Kykar.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to draw cards in white and blue. Cloud Blazer, Mull Drifter, a lot of different really exciting things. You can also have some tricky things with like a Mull Drifter and its Evoke ability, but we won't get into that here. This is a very well-known archetype as well, as are all of the cards pretty much in Foundation. So again, you can just go online, look up Flicker decks, and you'll have just a mountain of possibilities in front of you there.
All right. The first half of this deck is ETB creatures. The second half is non-creature spells that can help trigger your commander. A lot of these are probably going to be blink spells because that's just what the deck is desiring to do. But you can use flexible spells like Parting Gust, which is white for an instant, so you can gift to tap fish. You exile target non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it on the beginning of the next end step.
Yeah.
So this can either be a removal spell that exiles any creature,
or
it can
opponent
be
the fish.
a blink spell that reuses one of the ETBs.
Yeah, that's very, very powerful. There's also just the actual blink spells like Momentary Blink. 1 in the white for an instant, you exile a creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So you can do this if someone targets your commander with something. You cast Momentary Blink, you blink your commander, but you also get the commander's ability to blink something else, which is very powerful. And then you can flash this back. So from the graveyard, if you're not returning it to your hand with another card like Archaeomancer, you can just pay 3 in a blue to replay this card from your graveyard. So it's got a ton of value on it, and it's just an absolute staple in a deck like this.
There are also permanents that can repeatedly blink your creatures, like a teleportation circle is 3 in a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So this is a single blink instance that happens every single one of your end steps.
Soul Herder is very similar. It's a creature version that gets bigger. It gets 1/1 counters every time another creature is exiled from the battlefield. And then at the beginning of your end step, you may exile a creature you control, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So having a couple of these, right, you want a balance of the creatures that are going to blink stuff as well as things that want to get blinked. And that way they're just coming in and out and you're getting all those triggers. You're getting a ton of value. And it's going to be very hard, again, for your opponents to keep up with that amount of generation.
I think your deck is going to be full of really, really cheap non-creature spells and even some free ones to be able to blink something the turn that your commander comes down.
Absolutely.
Something like a Mishra's Bauble is a 0 mana artifact that you can sacrifice to look at a card, but mostly to draw a card. So you can play your commander for 4, you can cast a Mishra's Bauble right away, blink something that you'd played on an earlier turn, and now you've gotten value out of your commander at the moment that it hits the battlefield.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's a lot of 0 mana artifacts that you can do this with. Gitaxian Probe is a 0 mana essentially sorcery because instead of paying the 1 blue mana for it, you can just pay 2 life. And you get to look at the player's hand and draw a card. So this refills your hand, but most importantly, it gives your commander a blink ability the moment it comes down. Now, if you just happen to have 5 mana the turn you cast Kykar, let's say you ramped on 3, Then you have a ton of 1-mana spells that are great. So Opt is a 1 blue instant, scry 1 and draw a card. You got Brainstorm. You got a lot of cards in this world. You also have removal spells like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares. These are your classic white mana, 1-mana removal spells. And again, the cheaper, the better, because it means that you don't have to exhaust your mana in order to make sure you have a play when your commander comes down. Because if experienced players know what they're up against, they're going to want to try and target your commander. That's usually what happens.
I like the instant speed ones the best because it allows you to target the same creature on multiple turns. Remember, it comes back on your end step, so you can't keep blinking the same creature over and over and over again on the same turn. Finally, there's some cards that benefit from your cards leaving the battlefield and entering the battlefield. A new one like the Frog Dour Port Mage is pretty sweet.
This little dude is a lot of fun. 1 in the blue Frog Wizard for a 1/3. Whenever one or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, aka blink, draw a card. And then it has an activated ability where you pay 1 in the blue and tap the Dour Port Mage, return another target creature you control to its owner's hand. So not as great as blinking, but this is something you do at instant speed to protect your commander or other pieces on your board if you don't have a blink spell up. And you're going to draw a card because of the Dour Port Mage already. And if you happen to be flickering a lot, then you also get that draw regardless, which is pretty darn powerful.
Panharmonicon is a card that says when artifacts or creatures enter the battlefield, their abilities trigger twice. That's going to be great with all your enter the battlefield triggers. Plus, it's
Keep
a non-creature.
track.
Plus, it's a non-creature spell that you can cast to exile a creature and have it return to the battlefield. This time, doubled.
Yeah, you do love that. There's a fun board wipe here called Time Wipe. Just 2 white, blue for a sorcery, and it says return a creature you control to its owner's hand, then destroy all creatures.
Nice.
So the combo here is obviously play this, blink something you want to stick around because it's going to come back on an end step, and then bring your commander back to your hand.
Yeah, I think Time Wipe is often not quite enough value, but here it feels great.
Yeah.
Because you could cast a cheap spell like an Opt, exile one of your creatures, cast Time Wipe, exile another
one.
Then return your commander to your hand, and you have 2 creatures, and that's how you turn a board wipe into a one-sided board wipe.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff and a great way to just establish such a huge advantage with your commander that at that point, it's just you are going to take over the game. But again, this is one of those, I'd say, higher, got to do a lot of work to keep up with what's going on. So if you're going to play this type of deck, make sure your mental load is ready for what's about to happen.
Blue-white blink is very tricky, but it's very, very powerful.
Very good, yeah.
Up next, we've got Magic's newest cutie patootie. It's Loot Exuberant Explorer.
Yay, Loot got another card.
2 and a green, very legendary beast noble. It says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and it has an activated ability, 4 green, tap, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from among them and put it onto the battlefield. Ooh. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order.
Okay, so this is a full-blown lands deck. You want to put as many lands on the battlefield as possible, especially because you can play an additional land on each of your turns. Ideally, you play this on turn 2 or 3, and then you put another land immediately on the battlefield. So you can get to that 6-mana activated ability and all of the other monsters that are in your deck that you're going to want to play.
Yeah, the big plan with this deck is to play a lot of lands and cheat big creatures onto the battlefield with Loot's ability. Ideally, you're going to have a lot of lands in your hand and you're going to be able to play them out very quickly with your commander.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing about playing a deck that cares about playing a lot of lands is card advantage, making sure that you always have 2 lands to play when you have your commander on the battlefield. So a great way to do that is to be able to play lands off the top of your library with something like a Courser of Kruphix. Gives you that ability to look at the top card of your library and play it if it's a land.
And you gain some life whenever lands enter the battlefield under your control.
Pretty good.
Oracle of Moldiah allows you to get another additional land drop on each of your turns, and you, again, this time you play with the top card of your library revealed, and like Courser of Kruphix, you can play lands from the top of your library.
Being able to look at the top of your library is also nice because you can see what kind of big beastie there is on top.
In case you want to use the ability.
You'll dig deeper, but if you see a creature you really want, now you can set up a very cool move.
Yeah, I mean, the best way that this deck functions is, again, you play Loot, play another land out of your hand. Next turn, you play an Oracle of Moldiah, and then now you're basically hoping that on the top of your library are a bunch of lands in a row. Because you play that card, and then you don't have to draw a card. You still have your hand. Reveal the next card. If that's a land, you play that. And you reveal the next card. If that's a land, you can play that because you have 2 additional land drops now on each of your turns. And you're going to instantly get up to 7-8 mana very quickly and be able to use Loot's ability without having to really stress out yourself trying to get it out there because you're just having access from both your hand and the top of your library.
The other way to ensure that you have a land to play every turn is to play lands out of your graveyard. This usually combines with fetch lands, lands that sacrifice themselves to go find another land in your library and they go to your graveyard. If you have something like a Crucible of Worlds or a Ramionap Excavator, it allows you to play lands from your graveyard. So you can replay that fetch land that you just put in the graveyard back on the battlefield as your second land drop and sacrifice it again. Now you have another land you can play next turn.
Yeah, landfall decks are very powerful. There's a more pro card called Life from the Loam, which is 1 in the green for a sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So just incredible when you have these extra land drops. And then Dredge 3. So anytime you draw a card, you may say instead, you know what, I'm going to mill 3 cards and return Life from the Loam from my graveyard to my hand. Because you might mill more lands to put in there to play out again with Life from the Loam. So the loops you can get into here are very, very powerful.
All right, we want lands. So we need creatures that care about lands in your deck.
Yeah, we don't want mana dorks in this deck.
You know that your commander cares about creatures, looking at the top 6 and be able to cheat a creature into play. So having big creatures in the deck that care about that, or just powerful creatures that care about that, is going to go a long way. I like Regal Behemoth a lot here. It's 4 green for a dinosaur. When it enters, you become the monarch. But then, whenever you tap a land for mana while you're the monarch, add an additional 1 mana of any color. You're going to have some big creatures that can trample in to take the monarch if you need to, but you have a ton of lands in play, so doubling them is even more powerful.
Yeah, and especially if you can just tap 3 lands to activate your commander. You've got cards like Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. It's 4 green for a star Vigilance Reach. Enters the battlefield, you mill 4 cards, then you return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you've been using fetch lands and a bunch of different ways to get lands in your graveyard from the beginning, this might enter and put in 6, 7, 8 lands on the battlefield, and then its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. So this could just be a 12-12 Vigilance Reach, and no one can get through at that point, and you're just having a great attacker each turn.
There's even some new landfall creatures in Foundation to keep an eye out for. Mossborn Hydra enters with a counter on it, but it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double the number of +1/+1 counters on this creature.
Ooh-wee.
Notably, it has trample. So every time a land comes in, it gets bigger and bigger, exponentially large Hydra for only 3 mana.
Yeah, another new card from Foundation is Quilled Great Worm, 4 green for a 7/7 trampler. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many 1/1 counters on it. You may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs.
Yeah,
so.
This one doesn't have landfall, but it is a big, scary creature that you're opening in Foundation's packs. If you have it, put it right into this deck.
Yeah, you're going to want to have some just huge, scary creatures to use with Loot's second ability that aren't necessarily landfall related.
There's some more value landfall creatures that you can include. It's Lotus Cobra. Whenever a land enters, you add a mana of any color to your mana pool, so likely green in this deck.
Incredible with fetch lands. Incredible just in general with like Lumra when you're getting other ways to put lands on the battlefield. And when you play multiple lands a turn, this essentially is a mana doubler. Tireless Provisioner is another landfall scout. It's 2 and a green for an elf scout. 2/3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can either make a food token or a treasure token. So food, if you're getting low on life and you need to save yourself, your mono green probably not. The treasure is real good because, again, if you have a bunch of ways to get a bunch of landfall triggers, 3 lands a turn, you're essentially doubling that mana.
All right. The cool part of this deck is the big, scary creatures. We've mentioned a couple of them already. You're going to want a lot of high mana value creatures, probably 4 or more.
Yeah.
I would say that like 18
Oh,
plus?
yeah.
Because you want to be able to hit something big and impactful every time you activate loot. So look for those big, scary creatures, including one reprinted in Foundation, Ghalta, Primal Hunger.
It's a 12 mana spell that costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So this is totally fine to have in your hand because it might just cost 2 mana at some points, or 3 or 4.
Plus, it's a 12/12 trample. Ghalta's a big lady.
Yeah.
There's lots of cool creatures that you can choose here. So if you find one that you like, you should put it in the deck.
Mono green.
Cultivator Colossus is sweet. When it enters, its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and when it enters the battlefield, you may play a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat the process. So if you have a land in your hand, you play it, you draw a card. If that's a land, you play it, you draw a card. If you have another land, you play it, you draw a card. It's very powerful. It goes right along with what the deck wants to do.
Yeah, Regal Forest is a giant 7-drop. When it enters, you draw a card. For each green creature you control, your mono green, you're going to have a ton. Vaultborn Tyrant is just a huge dinosaur that... so much text. 7 mana, 6/6. Yeah, the ETB is important here that when it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card. And then when it dies, you make a copy of it, which is wild.
So you're gaining life, you're drawing cards, you have this huge creature, and it cares about putting more creatures onto the battlefield. Again, you can't really go wrong with something that's 6 or 7 mana and a green in this deck. So if you have a card that you like, put it in.
Yeah. The classic win con is Avenger of Zendikar. It's just 7 mana, makes a bunch of plant tokens, and they all get buffed when you have lands enter the battlefield. And Rampaging Baloths, 6 mana, 6/6 trample. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token.
Make a lot of beasts.
Yeah, so...
plus your commander's a beast noble, I think.
Wow. So again, mono green, a lot of players have made this deck before. We talk about usually one mono green commander every set review, it seems. So again, go online. There's a lot of places to reference in case you are looking for other scary, big, green, dumb creatures. Or this is great for that Magic player that has an old collection with cards that they don't have other places to go, but it costs like 6-7 mana. This is one of those decks.
All right, we're moving on to another classic character in Magic. It's Niv-Mizzet Visionary.
All right, this is 4 blue and a red for a 5/5 dragon wizard. It has flying, and it says you have no maximum hand size because you get to draw a lot of cards in these colors. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may draw that many cards. No, you just draw that many cards.
No, you draw. You're going to deck yourself. You best be careful.
You best be careful, yeah. So a source dealing non-combat damage means it could be a creature that pings players, it could be a lightning bolt, it could be anything that's basically not a creature attacking in combat. And you're going to draw that many cards. So a lightning bolt reads 1 mana, red instant, deal 3 damage to any target, draw 3 cards. Very, very powerful.
It's wild. And as long as that lightning bolt wouldn't face, of course.
Yes.
But in this deck, it definitely is. So this is a burn-focused spellslinger deck that plays cheap spells to take advantage of a huge amount of card advantage that your commander gives you. Fair warning, this is a very powerful dragon that will draw you a lot of cards and will make the table appropriately scared.
Yeah, this goes infinite as well with a decent number of cards. You got to be careful if a Niv-Mizzet is across from you. It could end the game the moment it comes down.
It goes infinite with Niv-Mizzet Perun.
There you go. 2 Niv-Mizzets together, looking at each other going, wait a minute, I'm a newer version of you and you're an older version of me. Together, we are infinity. So non-combat damage is the way to get there. Non-combat damage. So Fire Spitter Whelp is a new card in Foundation. It's a 2 and a red flyer. When it says, whenever you cast a non-creature or dragon spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's going to be 3 cards typically for each non-creature or dragon spell that you cast.
These kind of pingers are very popular, and you will see sort of in various forms over the years. Firebrand Archer is another form, but one that you can find in Foundation is Bolt Wave.
This is insane.
Yeah, this is a new lightning bolt variant. It's a single red for a sorcery. It deals 3 damage to each opponent.
With your commander out, you draw 9 cards. 1 mana, draw 9. That power level is beyond.
It is absurd. I really like pingers in this deck because your commander is expensive. So you want something that you can activate for free to get some value out of him right away.
Right away, yeah.
So if you play Niv-Mizzet, he hits the battlefield, then you can activate something like a Thermo Alchemist that says tap and deal 1 damage to each opponent, and then you can draw 3 cards immediately. Spear Spewer does the same sort of thing. So having pingers, having your commander means you're guaranteed. Or you can hold up 1 red mana for a lightning bolt or a chain lightning or the bolt wave that we just mentioned, and you can draw some cards that way as well.
Wild. Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, this card goes immediately infinite with 2 of the Niv-Mizzets, Niv-Mizzet Perun and Niv-Mizzet the Firemind. Just look them up. We don't need to talk about them in Foundations here.
Yeah, these direct burn spells are so powerful in this deck. You do have to be careful that you're not dealing more damage than you have cards in your library.
Yeah.
But getting some burn done before your commander hits the battlefield is going to be the way to win with this deck.
Yep. Obviously, playing cheap spells is great in a deck like this because you're going to want to make sure that you can always keep drawing into the things that you do and then have the mana to cast that 1 mana burn spell or whatever it is.
Plus, it's good with all your Fire Spitter Whelps and your Firebrand Archers that trigger whenever you cast a spell.
Yeah, so you kind of have to also think, if my commander never survives, which it often won't in this case, how do I win the game without Niv-Mizzet out? And so the combination of your Firebrand Archers and your Ops or your Brainstorms is how you're going to get there.
I really like these 1 mana or 2 mana cantripping burn spells like Playful Shove. Deals 1 damage to any target and you draw a card for 2 mana. So it's 1 in a red, deal 1 damage, draw 2 with your commander in play. But it cantrips and does some damage and will help trigger a lot of things in your deck.
Yeah, Needle Drop is a great addition to that 1 mana instant red. Needle Drop deals 1 damage to target creature or player that was dealt damage this turn. So really easy with your pingers, and then you get to draw a card on Needle Drop, and then another one with your commander. So 1 mana for 2 cards is even a busted rate in Commander and Magic. Ancestral Recall, one of the most powerful spells of all time, it's banned in Commander, is 1 mana draw 3. You're going to have many cards in this deck that overperform that when your commander is out.
All right. Things are always going to be good when you have your commander in play, but there are lots of other support pieces that you should still run in this deck when you can't keep Niv-Mizzet safe on the battlefield.
Yep. Stormkiln Artist is an incredible card. 3 in a red for a 2/2. Gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. We don't care about that. We care about Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you create a treasure token. So again, the way that this deck wins is you play a spell, you get more mana, you draw a card, you play a spell, you get more mana, you draw a card, and then you're just piling on these triggers over and over and over again. Eventually, you have enough burn to take out the table, and then you've drawn 50 cards as a result. So you have the answers in case someone tries to go after you.
Archmage Emeritus and Archmage of Runes, which is new in Foundation, have similar effects. It's whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card.
And Archmage of Runes makes your instant and sorceries cost 1 less to cast.
And we'll take that.
Similar to a Goblin Electromancer, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And Thunderclap Drake, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast.
Yeah.
So all of these mana reduction spells make your deck just that much more powerful because now you're able to, instead of being able to chain, let's say 2 or 3 spells a turn, now you're chaining 5 or 6 or more spells.
This is a great Mana Geyser deck, as many Spell Slinger decks are. It's 3 red, add red for each tapped lands your opponents control. The nice thing about Mana Geyser in this deck is you can cast your commander with only 1 blue pip of mana. So if you cast Mana Geyser and you get 12 mana, you can cast your commander with a single blue pip, and then you have a ton of red mana left over to chain all of these things together like we're talking about.
And a ton of blue mana because you only had to tap 1.
Yeah. There's big burn spells in this deck like Price of Progress that can deal a ton of damage all at once and draw you easily 20 cards. You have to be able to make use of your commander the moment it hits the battlefield because it is going to be so scary.
Yeah, very similar to Koma, right? Make sure you have your counterspell protection up when you cast your commander, and typically you're going to want to be able to do your busted business the turn it comes out because the moment you're done with your turn, all eyes are on you, and your commander is probably going to go bye-bye if you can't protect it.
Counterspells help.
Counterspells help, especially free counterspells, but...
That's Niv-Mizzet. It's busted once again.
Yeah, I don't know why they made it so busted, but I guess...
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to put it in Dragon's Approach.
Oh my goodness.
9 cards per Dragon's Approach? Come on.
Yeah, that's
Live
why
fast, die young.
You kill Rachel first at any table you ever sit at with her. All right, next up we got a cutie pie. It's Tinybones, Bauble Burglar. Bauble, bauble, bauble. Tinybones is back. And Tinybones cares about making players discard cards, which we'll talk about in just a second. So 1 in the black for a 1/3. Whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it. During your turn, you may play cards you don't own with stash counters on them from exile, and any mana of any type can be spent to cast those spells. And finally, 3 in the black, tap Tinybones to make each opponent discard a card, and only do this as a sorcery, so on your turn only.
Fair warning. Tinybones is a little cutie pie. And you look at the art and you're like, I want to build this card. And then your opponents look at what the card says and they will kill you.
Yes, there's a very few things that universally most players dislike, and discarding cards is up there. Mass land destruction is up there as well, but the list of things that make players genuinely unhappy is pretty small. large percentage of players. Making players discard cards from their hand, especially if they've just built a deck and they want to try out a new card and you make them discard it, is very much an unhappy place for a lot of players to be. So be forewarned, if you build a deck like Tinybones, and again, discard is an archetype, a well-known one in Commander, you will draw a lot of ire and a lot of hate.
That being said, this deck is designed to strip your opponents of all of their hands and use those cards for your evil deeds.
And the best part is it exiles them from their hand as well, so they can't even get it back.
Brutal.
So
the first thing that you need to put into a Tinybones deck if you're going to brave the ire of the table is a whole bunch of discard.
Yay! Not so yay. I don't love it. Elder Fang Disciple, 1 in the black, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. And with Tinybones out, they all get little stash counters on them.
Siphon Mine says each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way.
Yep, that's
you get
very
3 out of
good.
their hand. You replace it with 3 in your hand. We love that.
We do love that.
It's going to be very powerful to be able to limit the cards in your opponent's hand and grow your hand, because that's basically what your commander says, is be able to use the cards that they want to play with for you to play with them instead.
Next up, Dark Deal, 2 in the black. Each player discards all the cards in their hand and draws that many cards -1. So you want to empty your hand first before this, or not. You know, sometimes you just don't like the cards in your hand, and then you get to draw a new hand, but every single card in the opponent's hand now becomes yours to deal with.
All right, Rankle's Prank does something similar. Each player discards 2 cards. It has additional modes to make players lose life and sacrifice creatures, but most likely you're going to have everybody discard 2, including yourself. But that game draws you 6 cards?
Wild. Bottomless Pit, 1 black enchantment. During each player's upkeep, that player discards a card at random. Wow, how can we make people like you less? And then the original Tinybones, Trinket Thief, 1/2 for a 1 in the black. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discards a card this turn, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Is it the second? Yeah, it's the original one, right?
Yeah, that's the original.
Yeah.
He's always been such a cutie and so naughty. With your commander on the battlefield, every time you make an opponent discard cards, it gets you cards in return. And it includes their removal, their ramp, their card draw. Those are the ones that you're really looking for, because their deck will be built around their commander, which you don't have access to. But you're looking for like little pieces of
Yeah. I want a rampant growth this turn.
Yeah, I'll take
take your
that.
Swords to Plowshares, no prob.
So not every card you steal from their hand is going to be particularly useful to you, but the vegetables will be.
Yeah, so if you're not going to be able to use their cards to make your deck win, let's say they have a bunch of Landfall Matters cards, you're like, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
You're going to need to be able to do its own thing to be able to basically win on your own terms, because that's one, you're going to need to try and win quickly because everyone's want to kill you. And 2, you're not going to be able to guarantee to be able to do it. Maybe you're playing against decks that just have cards that don't matter to you, like a Minotaur tribal deck. Doesn't matter to you at all.
Yeah, you just don't have the support to make that deck happen. So your deck needs to have its own proactive plan that isn't just strip my opponents of all of their hands, because they will kill you.
Yep.
So something you can combine with that is very powerful. The discard strategy is Reanimator, because you're going to be discarding cards as well. A lot of powerful discard cards are symmetrical. Right. So if you discard a big thing that you could reanimate, like we were talking about earlier with Alesha, that's a great strategy that goes very well with what Tinybones wants you to do. Plus, so there's some great, big, powerful cards that care about stealing your opponent's things.
Yeah. So a really powerful one is Brain Stealer Dragon. It's 5 black for a dragon horror, 6/6 flyer. At the beginning of your end step, you exile the top card of each opponent's library. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. If you cast a spell this way, you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So very similar to Tinybones' ability, but in this case, it's doing it from the top of their library. Doesn't draw as much hate, but still very powerful. And then whenever a non-land permanent an opponent owns enters the battlefield under your control, they lose life equal to the mana value.
There you go. That's
So
a great
now
payoff
you
for
go.
your commander.
So now every time you play something either that they discard and you exiled, or you got from the top of their library, they're going to start taking that much damage equal to this mana value.
Thieving Amalgam is a favorite of mine. It's a 7-mana ape snake. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest the top card of that player's library. So you steal it, it becomes a face-down 2/2. But the important thing here is whenever a creature you control but don't own dies, its owner loses 2 life and you gain 2 life.
Yep.
It's another great payoff for casting your opponent's things.
Yeah, and then we got the new Valgavoth Terror Eater from Duskmourn. 6 black, black, black. Very hard to cast normally, but you're probably going to want to reanimate this sucker. A 9/9 flying lifelink. It's got a ward cost of sacrificing 3 non-land permanents, so I don't think anyone's ever going to try and kill this with a removal spell. If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So even after you cast a spell from exile that belongs to them, like a sorcery or an instant, it gets exiled again. And it says, during your turn, you may play cards exiled with Valgavoth. And if you cast a spell this way, you can pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. So this is like double the veggies, double the removal spells, and you never basically allow them to get the cards that you exiled back.
Yeah, so if you have Valgavoth in play and your commander, you're probably choosing to exile them with Valgavoth instead of your commander, because you can only have it be exiled with one ability.
Yeah.
But Valgavoth allows you to cast them by paying life instead of paying their mana cost. So it's a much more powerful ability. And it goes very, very well with the rest of like the discard shenanigans that are happening. So I like Valgavoth in this deck, even though it doesn't particularly work with what your commander does. It works with what your deck does.
Yeah.
It's a great, scary thing to have on the battlefield.
A new card from the Assassin's Creed set is Staff of Eden Vault Key. This is a 6-mana legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you put a target legendary card not named Staff of Eden from a graveyard on the battlefield under your control. So it could be your own graveyard with your Valgavoth. And it says tap, draw a card for each permanent you control but don't own. So incredible with the Thieving Amalgam.
Yeah, it's also very good with your commander, right?
Yeah.
So I like that you can reanimate stuff out of their graveyard that they're discarding here. It's expensive, but it is going to draw you a lot of cards.
Yep.
So if we know what we're reanimating, how are we going to reanimate them?
So this is kind of like a subcategory of Tinybones, but reanimation has not really been seen outside of Alesha, I guess. There's a lot of spells that just get cards from graveyards and put them onto the battlefield. So the most classic is just reanimate. 1 black for a sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard on the battlefield under your control, and you lose life equal to its mana value.
Yeah, or Animate Dead, which is an aura that does basically the same thing. You cast it, targeting a creature in the graveyard, it returns to the battlefield, enchanted with Animate Dead. So you can reanimate a 9-drop by only paying 2
mana, yeah.
These are very, very powerful effects and give you a strong proactive plan that goes along with your commander's general idea, but doesn't revolve around just stripping their hands endlessly.
Yeah, and you'll find that if you play this deck and only strip their hands, people will actually just hate you. You want to at least have some other way to win, and reanimation is a great way to do that. And when you're reanimating big, scary creatures in black, there's a lot of options to really help close out the game more quickly, because when players have no cards in their hand, they want the game to end. And we didn't mention it here, but there are a lot of cards in mono black specifically that double the mana you are tapping, so that you can get up to 9 mana, 10 mana for those expensive spells more easily. So you can look those up. Cards like Cryptghast, Crypt of Agadim, Cabal Coffers.
Sure.
There are a lot of lands and creatures that allow you to double your mana in black, and so those are options for you as well. Again,
and it lets you cast all the spells that you're exiling with your commander as well.
Yeah, and you want to end the game quickly. That's all I'm going to say. Please do not show this deck against me, though. I won't want to play against it.
You've been warned.
You've been warned.
Tinybones fanatics.
Yeah, but we know you're out there, and if you're a new Foundations player, we don't want to tell you to not play something. You'll just learn on your own whether or not your play group accepts it or not.
All right. Finally, we've got Zimone Paradox Sculptor. She's back.
Yay! 2 green and the blue. Zimone is everywhere. It's a 1/4 human wizard. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. And for the cheap cost of blue and a green, you can tap Zimone to double the number of each kind of counter on up to 2 target creatures and or artifacts you control. Artifacts. Interesting. So doubling of counters on stuff.
So this deck can go in a couple of different directions. It wants creatures that have a lot of counters on them that get bigger at exponential speed.
Scary.
Or you could put counters on artifacts and double the number on those artifacts, which usually means they make a lot of mana to cast even more big things.
Yay! So let's talk about the 1/1 counter side of it first. Again, each combat on your turn, you get to put 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So you want creatures that care about having a bunch of counters on them or like it when counters are added. So Fathom Mage is a classic 2 green and a blue for a 1/1. It has Evolve, so anytime a bigger creature enters, it gets a 1/1 counter. And whenever a 1/1 counter is put on it, you may draw a card. So this allows you to just continually draw cards with Zimone, even if it's a really big creature and it's no longer evolving upwards.
If you don't want to focus on like counter triggers like Fathom Mage, focusing on doubling the number of counters on a creature that has a ton of counters makes Zimone even more powerful. So something like a Mana Gorge or Hydra that gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a player casts a spell.
Yeah, I've seen this thing get up to like a 25/25 before.
It's wild. And if
it
you're
has trample.
doubling the counters on it, this thing needs to be eliminated right away.
Yeah, within 2 turn cycles and a Zimone activation, you might be able to kill someone with 1 shot with the Mana Gorge or Hydra.
Very powerful.
Same with the Colonian Hydra. It's a 3 green, enters the battlefield with 4 1/1 counters, but whenever it attacks, it doubles the number of 1/1 counters on each creature you control. So that will affect the counters on your Fathom Mage. You draw a card. Your Mana Gorge or Hydra will get even bigger. And then if you Zimone beforehand, this thing just gets massive.
Hydroid Krasis is a great +1/+1 counter card that works really well with making a ton of mana, which we'll talk about in a second. But it's when you cast the spell, you gain half of X life and draw half of X cards, and you round down each time. Its mana cost is X green blue. So if you pay 4 into X, you draw 2 cards and you gain 2 life. Then it's a flying trample creature with X +1/+1 counters on it. So if X is 4, it's a 4/4 with flying and trample.
So
you
big.
can double.
Yeah, Hydra Krasis is nuts.
This card's really powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And again, flying and trample, you can see what's happening here. You're getting in with big creatures. Now, of course, you're going to get removal pointed at your creatures. So a great way to save the counters and to move them around is a card like the Ozolith, which is a 1-mana artifact. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, you put those counters on the Ozolith, and it kind of stores them. And it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you can move all of the counters onto another creature.
Also, Zimone can double the number of counters on the Ozolith because it's an artifact.
Now, when you have counters, there are ways to turn the counters into ramp. So there's a few cards here. Rishkar Pima Renegade is 2 and a green for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you put 2 counters on up to 2 target creatures. And then it says each creature you control with a counter on it has tap add green. So this instantly turns 2 of your creatures into Mandorks, and then any of your creatures with 1 counters on it will become Mandorks as well. Kami of Whispered Hopes is 2 and a green, and it says if 1 or more 1/1 counters will be put on a permanent you control, that many +1 1/1 counters are put on that permanent instead. So it kind of doubles just to 1 singular counter. And then tap add X mana of any one color where X is Kami of Whispered Hope's power. So this might become like a 10/10 tapping for 10 mana. Very good.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do with +1/+1 counters. You can turn them into cards. You can turn them into mana. You can turn them into a win directly on the spot.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a new card that's a ton of fun. It's 20-Toed Toad. It's 3 and a blue for a frog wizard. It says your maximum hand size is 20.
Cute.
Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on 20-Toed Toad and draw a card. Whenever the toad attacks, you may win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it, or you have 20 or more cards in hand. So because you are able to double the number of counters on things, you can get to this win con pretty quickly as long as you can keep the toad in play. And it's a really fun way to win the game.
Yeah, another less fun way to win the game is controlling the game with a card like Elenda Archmage, which is 3 and a blue for a fairy wizard with flying, and it's a 2/2, and it says pay a blue, sacrifice Elenda Archmage, counter target non-creature spell. And then it has a special ability called Persist on it. So if this creature dies and it didn't have any -1/-1 counters on it, it returns to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. And the way to get rid of -1/-1 counters is by putting a +1/+1 counter on it. So this allows you to counter a spell. It comes back to the battlefield, and then with any number of effects in your deck, you put a 1/1 counter on it. It no longer has that -1/-1 counter, so that when you pay a blue to sack it to counter another non-creature spell, it comes right back. So this is a great way to set up a board state and then protect it over and over and over again with your Elenda Archmage. Very annoying because the 1/1 counters from your commander get rid of the -1/-1 counters. It can just endlessly persist.
Yeah, this is a very powerful card to put in a deck like this, but you've got some big scary things that you need to protect.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. If you're looking for foundation cards to put into the new Zimone deck, Doubling Season caught a sweet reprint that doubles the number of counters that you put on any permanent, so it works well with your creatures when they enter. They're doubled already. Or Wildwood Scourge is a Hydra that caught a reprint as well. X and a green, it enters with X +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on another non-Hydra creature, you also put a counter on Wildwood Scourge.
Yeah, so every time Zimone triggers, you're just going to go up, 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 up.
All right. We mentioned artifacts. We're going to get into those next. Being able to double the number of counters on artifacts is wild.
Yeah, so Zimone loves artifacts as well. She's been studying up. So cards like Everflowing Chalice, which you cast for 0 but has a multi-kicker of 2. So if you pay 2 mana for it, it enters with 1 charge counter. If you pay 4 mana for it, it enters with 2 charge counters. And you can tap and add a colorless mana for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. So normally this is just a 2 mana artifact that taps for 1. But with Zimone, you're able to double the counters on it. So it can go to 2, 4, 8, and go upwards and upwards and upwards, which means that you can get a very powerful mana rock that just taps for an endless amount of mana, and then you can put all that mana into your X spells and make them even scarier.
Yeah, Everflowing Chalice goes really, really well with Hydras.
Yes.
Like the Hydroid Crisis that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Astral Cornucopia is similar. It's XXX. It enters with X charge counters on it, and it adds colored mana for each charge counter on it.
Yeah, so you can just, again, double those counters with Zimone and have it go up, up, up.
Yeah, so Rotating Fireplace, Pentad Prism, all of these are artifacts that have counters on them that turn those counters into mana. But there's other counters on artifacts that are very powerful as well. Transmogrifying Wand is a 3-mana artifact that enters with 3 charge counters on it, and you can remove a charge counter to destroy target creature, and its controller creates a 2/4 Ox token.
Yeah.
Activate only as a sorcery.
It's a fun removal spell. It turns everything into little 2/4 Oxes. But again, you normally can only do it 3 times, but with Zimone, if you just double it at 3, it goes up to 6, and you probably never have to touch it again with Zimone's ability.
Yeah, you just remove a creature every single turn.
Yeah, very powerful. Dark Steel Reactor is a fun one. This is a kind of a win con.
Yeah.
It's a 4-mana artifact that is indestructible, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on it, and when it has 20 or more charge counters on it, you win the game. So play this early, wait for it to get to 3 or 4 charge counters, and then activate Zimone a couple of times, and you're going to win.
If you want to win in a slightly less fun way, but still a definitive win, it's Magistrate's Scepter. 3 mana for an artifact that says 4, tap, put a charge counter on Magistrate's Scepter, and tap, remove 3 charge counters from Magistrate's Scepter. Take an extra turn after this one.
No thanks.
Yeah. So basically, you tap it, you put a counter on it, Zimone doubles it. Then the next time you untap with it, I believe you go pretty infinite.
Yeah, because you can just keep the
Because
counters
you
on.
can double it, remove 3, take an extra turn, double it, remove 3.
Yeah,
take
you just
an
got to
extra
get up to that first 3, right?
You just have to get to 6.
Yeah.
Or more. So yeah, it needs to get up to 8, I guess, is doubling it how it works. It starts at 1.
Either way, it's pretty powerful. You're going to take a lot of extra turns.
it gives you infinite turns eventually.
Yeah, Millennium Calendar is a 1-mana artifact. Whenever you untap 1 or more permanents, you put that many time counters on Millennium Calendar, and then you can pay 2, tap to double the time counters on it. And then if you have 1,000 or more time counters on it, you sacrifice it, and each opponent loses 1,000 life. Sick. Yeah, so again, you have 2 doubling abilities. We all know it's like when you're trying to fold a piece of paper in half over and over again, it gets real thick real fast.
So we've talked a lot about different kinds of counters. There's even more throughout the game, and you can do some crazy stuff with them. I like, Replicating Ring is very silly. It's at the beginning of your upkeep. You put a night counter on Replicated Ring. Then if it has 8 or more night counters on it, you remove all of those, and you make 8 more Replicating Rings, which are 3-mana artifacts that tap to add 1 mana of any color.
And then they all start getting more night counters on them.
Do the tokens do that too?
Yeah,
No. The token ones don't have the first ability. They just have the add. Yeah, but you still have the original Replicating
it just keeps
Ring,
going?
right? Do you
Yeah.
sacrifice it? I don't
No,
think
I
so.
don't think so.
No,
You
you
just
just remove the counters and start again.
Go again.
Mana.
You have creatures that also have counters on them, like Twitching Doll. Every time you tap it, you add a mana of any color, and you put a nest counter on it. And then you can tap and sacrifice the Twitching Doll to create a 2/2 green spider creature token for each counter on Twitching Doll. So that's just a great way to build a board state, but it's also just a cute little mana rock. Well, it's not very cute. It's actually terrifying.
I think it's a spider toy.
It's got spiders ripping out of its face.
Yeah.
It's awful.
It also counts the number of +1/+1 counters on it, so it's great in +1/+1 counter decks.
There you go.
There's a new one in Foundation that puts incubation counters on it. It's a Drake Hatcher. 1 and a blue, Vigilance Prowess. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, put that many incubation counters on it. Then remove 3 incubation counters from this creature and make a Drake.
Hey.
A 2/2 Drake with flying.
Another way to get a bunch of counters just ticking up slowly. As you can tell, when it starts on 1 counter and it's like, oh, geez, I got to double it to 2, then it goes to 4, it's not so hot. But if you have an ability called Proliferate in your deck, then you're able to add an additional counter of each kind that's already there whenever you proliferate. So a creature like Thrumming Bird, when it deals combat damage to a player, you proliferate. So now your Astral Cornucopia or your Everflowing Chalice goes from 1 to 2, and that makes the doubling ability of your commander even better. Same with your win con of the extra turn one. What was it called?
Magistrate
Scepter, right? Getting it to that additional counter is very important. Tezzeret's Gambit is a sorcery that allows you to proliferate and draw cards as well as and proliferate. So again, having proliferate in your deck. Canker Bloom, an amazing removal spell. 1 in the green for a creature Phyrexian Fungus. You can pay 1 to sacrifice it and choose to either destroy an artifact or an enchantment or proliferate. So a very flexible spell that's very good in a deck like this.
If you're a more advanced player, you can get fancy by turning other permanents into artifacts.
Oh.
So Liquid Metal Torque is a 2-mana artifact that says target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn.
Okay.
So if you have counters on a scary permanent like a Planeswalker.
Then it becomes an artifact Planeswalker.
And Zimone now has the option to double the counters on it, like loyalty counters.
Hey,
usually
there you
means you
go.
can ultimate it right away.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Liquid Metal Coating is also a card that does that. It's a little bit more of a runaround, but it works really well with your proliferate abilities.
And finally, you're in green blue. There are a lot of cards that just say tap, untap, target permanent. So that's a great way to get multiple activations. I feel like you want to build up to a lot of mana, get a couple of untappers out, and just go tick-tock, tick-tock, tap, untap, 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 and just double, and then have that explosive turn from there on out.
Yeah, this deck is going to be able to do some wild, over-the-top things, and it's going to have, predictably, a lot of math, because Zimone loves
math. That's right.
Those are the commanders we're going to talk about from Foundation. Before we go, we're going to talk about our favorite ones that we talked about here today and the ones that we think are the most powerful if you sit down across from them or build them.
Yeah. So my favorite commander is Zimone. We just talked about her. I have loved all the versions of Zimone so far. I love that there's like a prime number version. There's the one I played on Game Night. It's all about manifesting dread and landfall. And this one just wants to double stuff. And I think they're all really interesting. They all go definitely different directions in Simic. And green blue is one of the most powerful combinations of colors in Commander. So it's cool to see that there are multiple things that you can do with each different Zimone. So I'm all about that.
Yeah. I think my favorite is Alesha, who laughs at death. It's an aggressive, recursive. Alesha, who laughs at fate. That's a different card. It's a recursive, aggressive deck. That's the exact kind of style that I like playing. Be able to loop creatures and bring back value creatures, and then ultimately bring back a sweet haymaker for the end of the game.
Yeah.
So I think that one just suits me the best.
Very cool. All right, most powerful commander. I think we made it pretty obvious when we talked about it, but I think we just revealed that our votes are the same.
Yeah, it's Niv-Mizzet Visionary.
Yeah.
He's busted.
Yeah, Niv-Mizzet is absurd. In fact, you typically don't see commanders at this power level in regular sets. Even in commander sets, it's rare to see commanders that are at this level of power. This has the ability, again, to just draw you 20 cards in the turn that you cast it. Yeah. And anything that does that often has the ability to win on the spot. I wouldn't be surprised if people find ways to make this into a CEDH deck that's competitive EDH. This maybe has the possibility to do that. So it's powerful and it's very, very good. I don't know. You want to say anything else about it?
I think we'll see a lot of it. Something we didn't mention for Niv-Mizzet is it is powerful enough that you may want a couple bounce spells to be like, okay, stop. I have enough.
I can't keep drawing cards because if I do, I will deck myself. It's
so
not a May ability.
I need to return my own Niv-Mizzet to my hand to save myself from drawing too much of my library.
And before it goes, it happens to trigger my 3 pingers, and I'll draw an additional 20 cards, and then it's bounced.
It's wild. To the listeners, which commanders do you think are the most powerful in the set? Did we miss any? Are you planning on building any of the commanders we talked about today? If you're new to Magic, welcome. We hope this helps.
Let us know in the comments if you're new and this is your first set. It'd be very cool.
Yeah, hopefully you learned something about a commander that you wanted to build today. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments, and we'll hopefully answer anything that you could about building a cool new deck.
Yeah, we have very helpful people in the comments as well, so they're happy to answer you usually with some great constructive feedback.
If you want to pick up any of the cards that we talk about here today, you can do so while supporting the show at cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has a huge selection of singles and sealed product. If you're building a deck, you're going to need a ton of cards all at once. So you can pick it up from one trusted retailer in one place. Especially if you're buying a ton of cheap cards, it's really nice to be able to get them all in one envelope that arrives safely on your doorstep. We trust Card Kingdom here with our collections Whenever we're doing a big event, we get our cards from them, and they're always right on it and have a great team of customer support to help out if anything goes wrong. Again, support the show, get some cool cards. Welcome to Magic, cardkingdom.com/command.
And one of my favorite parts about Magic is the collection part of it. So ultrapro.com/command has all of your collecting needs, as well as just protecting your stuff. So whether or not you're sleeving up a new deck for the first time with their awesome Apex sleeves, or perhaps you're buying one of their new Mana 8 binders to get each of one of the colors so that you can build your collection in these awesome binders, ultrapro.com/command has got you covered. They have so many different accessories and awesome things to decorate your game room with, or make your protection look even cooler than before, or even to help sort your cards out. The only way to find out about all of that stuff is just by going to the website, ultrapro.com/command, signing up for their newsletter, checking out the amazing deals that they have all the time.
Yeah, if you're fresh back from MagicCon like we are, that's why my
So
voice
much
is
stuff.
so gone. You've got a sweet playmat covered in signatures. You can get it framed in a premier playmat case.
Yeah, I'm going to get actually a couple of those for some of the older playmats I got from MagicCons in the past that I want to use but not play on because I want to preserve just how cool they look. So ultrapro.com/command for all of your game accessory needs.
Before we go, we're going to say thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Eric Lem, Rachel Kendra, Grav Galati, Jamie Block, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Josh Murphy, Manson Lung, Christopher Matista, Karina Cruz, Sebastian Salazar, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, and yours truly, Josh Lee Kwai.
All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next time on the show. Bye-bye. Subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. Okay, bye.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.